Time Warner Audiobooks presents The Dig, written by Alan Dean Foster, read by John Shea. It's a rock, Mr. President. Warren Lyon Fraser, father, philanthropist, scion of a wealthy Illinois merchant family, and at present leader of the nominally free world, glanced up absently from behind his desk. From behind the desk, Earl reminded himself. It's about a mile in diameter. A mile-long rock, the president murmured. Or asteroid, rather. An asteroid, sir, that's right. That's the problem. That better be a big one. Fraser glanced significantly at the clock. It's the orbit, sir. That's the trouble. It's a declining orbit. Rapidly declining, as a matter of fact. If something isn't done very soon, it will enter our atmosphere, at which point it will crash into the surface, either in one very large piece and many tiny ones, or in a number of fairly large ones. I see. The president's expression did not change. And what if these hypothetical pieces don't land in the middle of the ocean? What if a big chunk were to come down somewhere near here? Why, in that case, sir, no one would have to worry about which party is going to dominate the next session of Congress, or any other phase of government for that matter. As bad as that? The president muttered. Yes, sir, as bad as that. We might lose everything as far north as Philadelphia. Baltimore, certainly. The president grunted softly. All right, then you better get going. You have people you need to talk to. I have to make some phone calls. Right, Mr. President. Earl left the chief executive reaching for one of the 3 telephones on his desk. It was the direct line to Moscow. Not that it mattered what he and President Kubilatov said to each other. All that mattered now was setting off the right-sized packages in the proper places on the surface of a fast-moving rock the size of a small Iowa town. The immediate priority was finding the best people to deliver those packages. It was Lowe's favorite place in the city. Down by the water, close to where the incomparable bridge spanned the inconceivable crack in the exquisitely beautiful coastal mountains. To impoverished immigrants from Asia and the Pacific Basin, it doubtless still was a golden gate. To the residents of Marin County, it was a shorter commute. To tourists from around the country and around the world, the ultimate souvenir picture. Today the entire length was visible, devoid of mist. That would disappoint the tourists, he knew. More than a few expected the fog to perform on cue, as if the city had giant fog machines installed outside the gate to create just the right photo op when the tour boats were cruising by. Fog or not, Lowe loved the bridge. There was no more gracile public structure in the United States, simple and functional, the Taj Mahal of the far west. He never tired of looking at it. And that's when he saw a familiar face coming toward him. Harry Page. The NASA representative was picking his way awkwardly over the rocks, an anxious expression on his wide, bearded face. It didn't bode well for the rest of the afternoon. It presaged formal conversation, which Lowe wanted no part of. The NASA rep was waving to him and calling his name. "Boston!" Page waved again, with studied enthusiasm. "How you doing, boss?" "I'm fine, Harry. Pull up a rock." Page did his best, and Lowe watched him squirm uncomfortably. "Now what brings you out to the edge of the continent?" Lowe already knew the answer. "Have you heard about the rock?" Lowe made a non-committal noise. "Anybody who hasn't?" Page chuckled. "Some rice farmer in Bangladesh, maybe, or a Mongol family out on the steppe. You know the rock's in a rapidly decaying orbit?" "I heard. What are they planning to do about it?" Page shook his head dolefully. "Man, you really are out of the loop, aren't you?" When Lowe didn't react, the rep continued. "The Russians are providing us with some state-of-the-art excavation packages. Really sharp stuff, minimal residual rads. Only they're not going to be used for widening canals or exposing deep ore bodies." "Kick it out into deep space?" Lowe inquired casually. Page shook his head again. "The intent is just to nudge it, stabilize the existing orbit." Lowe favored his visitor with that special gaze, the one that only people who have seen the Earth as a blue-white marble possess. "You want me to fly it, don't you, Harry?" "Well, not me, boss." Page glanced back up toward the road where others waited. "The agency, the project scientists and supervisors, the president and Congress." "I'm 42, Harry. I've commanded 2 shuttle missions and participated in 5. You ever heard of pressing your luck? I've had my fill of empty space. The Enterprise did that to me. The only space I want to explore anymore is the one inside of me. "And Boston, listen," Page began. "No, you listen, Harry." Lowe used the voice that made even multiple-term senators shut up. "I've had enough, understand? I'm not afraid. I'm not scared. I've just had enough. That's why I retired. It's called being sensible, so it doesn't matter who wants me." Page raised both hands defensively. "I told you it's not me, it's everyone else." "Well, what are they going to do, Harry? Threaten me? What are they going to threaten me with? Death? Dismemberment? The IRS? I warned them they couldn't intimidate you. I told them it wasn't possible. Nothing bothers you, Boston. You're not only not afraid of them, you're not afraid of anything. But everything you're telling me right now underscores your appropriateness for this project." Lowe gazed out across the water. "You're very clever, Harry. Too damn clever. That's why they sent you." "Well, did you ever think about where that rock's going to come down if it isn't dealt with, boss? I mean, if it isn't pushed just right?" He gestured expensively. "Or a big hunk of it might come down right here, right in the bay, or on the bridge, or on your house." "Well, it could happen any time in the future, too, if not this rock, another." "What about Woodside, or Turgeson, or even Murasaki?" Page was nodding. "Well, what about them? Any of them would probably bring it off. It's all a matter of trying to put together the best package, of stacking the odds in favor of success. Everybody, everything, says that putting you in charge gives us the best odds. You want to know what you can do with the odds?" Lowe could feel the temperature dropping as the fog began to block out the sun. Who else would be on the mission? Page felt a great weight lift from his shoulders. Lowe hadn't agreed to come aboard, hadn't consented to participate, had not in actual fact agreed to anything, but he'd stepped over an invisible line. "The co-pilot will be Ken Borden." Lowe's response was approving. "Ken's a good man. We've always been comfortable with each other." Coming from someone like Lowe, the word comfortable carried with it a raft of favorable connotations in the private lexicon of shuttle pilots. "Who else?" "You know Cora Miles?" Lowe brightened perceptibly. "Was she still in the program? Last I heard she was thinking of running for a House seat." "She is. This will probably be her last mission." Page's expression sought understanding. "We can count you in?" Lowe considered fog and gulls, wondering when he might see them again. "I suppose." His reply was committed and unenthusiastic. For his visitor's benefit he managed to smile, the same laconic open smile that had charmed journalists and politicians alike. "But only because the damn thing might land on my house, and I like it just the way it is." He'd tried and failed to get out of attending the reception. "Need your presence, old chap," Page and the others had insisted. "You're a reassuring influence, good for the program. Won't you pretty please come?" Didn't anyone understand that he was better at navigating clouds than canapes, better at explaining equipment failure than making small talk? Small talk, small people. Clenching his jaw, he stepped into the meeting room. It was door to derriere with mission specialists, spaceport personnel, hangers-on and would-be hangers-on, the privileged and friends of the privileged, a few captains, or at least lieutenants of industry, and those ubiquitous high-profile journalists who were nominal friends of the space program but who would desert its cause in an instant in favor of a high-profile murder case, especially if a celebrity or two were involved. There were also several famous science fiction writers trying hard to pick up women young enough to be their daughters, as well as more U.S. senators than one was likely to encounter outside of a major committee meeting. Feeling as out of place as a fern on the slopes of Erebus, Lowe made a beeline for the open bar. The crowd worked to his advantage. No one called out to him. With eyes only for busy bottles in the tip jar, the bartenders ignored him. While others availed themselves of the open bar, he settled as usual for carbonated liquid sugar. From the middle of the room, Borden waved at him. Lowe nodded in response. When the crowd briefly parted, he saw Cora Miles flanked by 2 congressmen from California and the senior senator from her home state of Texas, talking campaign strategy, no doubt. There was one man he badly wanted to meet. He was supposed to be in attendance, but so far Lowe hadn't spotted him. Ludger Brink was coming along as the representative of the European Economic Community Space Authority. NASA could have insisted on another of its own, but the exigencies of good public relations demanded otherwise. Besides, Brink was eminently qualified. Not only was he one of the world's 2 or 3 leading experts on meteorites and asteroids, with a shelf full of books and well-respected papers on the subject to his credit, he had spent months, not days, in space, as a researcher aboard the Mir 2 space station. He'd done 4 spacewalks, and his fluency in Russian would allow him to decipher any cryptic instructions that accompanied the critical explosives packages. His other specialty was extraterrestrial seismology, with particular reference to Ionian volcanism. "Commander Boston Law?" Turning, he found himself confronting a face that was well known to him, though what lay behind it was as much an enigma as that of the personality of any complete stranger. If you lived within the boundaries of the United States, you'd have to have spent your life in a cave not to know Maggie Robbins. She was one of the most famous telejournalists in the country, a regular on a highly rated newszine, and noted for her reports from hard-to-reach places. Lowe had watched her himself, but without making any personal connections. Up until this moment, she had been nothing more than another eminent talking head. Her presence did not delight him. Lowe liked interviews about as much as he'd once enjoyed escorting groups of VIPs around the Cape, an onerous burden to which all astronauts had once been subjected by an administrative fiat. He steeled himself for her questions. Lamentable though it might be, public relations was part of his job. If naught else, she certainly was one of the more attractive interviewers he'd been compelled to deal with. "Well, it's about time," she declared firmly. "I was beginning to wonder if you really existed, or if they were just going to stick a cardboard cutout of you in the pilot seat and send the ship up on automatics." "I beg your pardon," he replied politely. Her brows dipped slightly toward each other. "You know that I've been assigned by my network to do a comprehensive report on the whole project?" Before he could respond, she added, "You know that every reporter on this planet wanted this assignment and that NASA gave it to me. I think that's because of my history of support for the space program, and also because I'm comfortable working on what some people would call far-out stories, far out geographically as well as in subject matter." This was all delivered at a speed that left Lowe slightly breathless. He strove to make small talk. "I'm sure you'll do a fine report on the project." "Well, you can bet on that. I expected to be right up there with my exclusive interview with the chief of the Iranian underground last year and the head of the Chinese dissident movement the year before that. And those were both done on-site, you know. After wearing a chador for 3 months, I don't think a spacesuit will bother me." It sounded like she was going to try to do her report from inside a shuttle suit. Well, you had to admire her quest for verisimilitude, Lowe thought. She wasn't through. "Those tests they put you through are as tough as climbing the mountains in East Timor. At least you don't have to deal with torrential rains and leeches. But no problem," she smiled ingratiatingly. "I passed them all. Knew I would. Had a little trouble with balance, but nothing serious. Not enough to keep me off the mission." Lowe blinked. "Excuse me? Off the mission? I guess I don't understand." "What, you mean they haven't told you? There were 5 people scheduled to go on board. Who did you think the 5th one was?" "You?" It was his turn to gape. "Well, I expected another specialist, like Ludger Brink." His thoughts, so arduously pacified in preparation for the party, were now stirring afresh. He let his eyes meet hers. He didn't need to say anything. His gaze conveyed everything he was thinking, that she was unqualified, ignorant of what she was getting herself into, and that he considered her to be nothing more than excess baggage. "Whew!" She fanned herself melodramatically. "Turn it off, Commander. I once spent an entire evening watching 3 unpleasant, unshaven men with AK-47s slap my hostess around, trying to get her to admit to spying for the CIA. They kept threatening to start on me when they were finished with her. You're not going to frighten me off, Commander, so you might as well get used to the idea of having me around." "You're either a very brave woman," he remarked finally, "or a very stupid one." She grinned back at him. "Both hallmarks of the successful network journalist, Commander Lowe." Her expression changed to one of studied sincerity. "I won't get in your way, and I won't cause any trouble. Should any kind of emergency arise, I think you'll find me a fast learner. If I wasn't," and the smile returned, "I'd have been dead a dozen times over in as many years." "I don't doubt that." "You could do worse than be stuck with me. Keep that in mind." "I'll see you later, Boston Lowe." Without waiting to give him a chance for the last word, not that he wanted it anyway, she turned abruptly and disappeared into the crowd. Well, yes, he had to admit he could have done worse. She was engaging, intelligent, persistent, and easy on the eyes. All that really mattered, though, was if she would prove as good as her word and stay out of the way. That and that alone would make her welcome in his eyes. Offered a choice, though, he would have preferred to have on board another 50 kilos of atmosphere. Lowe relaxed in the pilot's chair, and with his practiced, experienced eye, scanned readouts he thought he'd never see again except in a movie. They'd changed hardly at all, and he'd been thoroughly checked out on the most recent modifications and additions. The calm voice of Mission Control whispered in his headset. There was a hypnotic quality to it, as there was to the complete moment. In his ear, the voice of Mission Control was beginning the ritual of counting down the remaining seconds verbally. It was an anachronism from the early days of spaceflight, turgid and melodramatic. No one had suggested doing away with it. Doing so would have sent the public relations people ballistic. Then there were only seconds left, too few and too much to do in them, and finally, not even that. A great roar, more vibration than sound, began beneath and behind them. Too overwhelming to allow for casual conversation or nervous jokes, it rose in volume until it dominated the universe. And then they were moving, the entire complex cylindrical skyscraper rising from its foundations and reaching, clawing at the sky. Slowly at first, accelerating steadily, kept from tumbling by patient internal gyros and high-speed programs. Hearing none of the cheers that accompanied their Promethean ascent, they rose into the blue as had dozens before them. Behind him, Brink was muttering aloud in German. Lowe caught a few words, but was too busy to go hunting for more. For the first time since he'd made her acquaintance, Robbins was silent. Whether she was awed or unconscious, it made no difference to him. Well, maybe a little, he chided himself. He was being too hard on her. Mission Control barked congratulations, which Lowe let the effusive Borden acknowledge. Follow-ups and checkouts continued unbroken. There was no room on shuttle flight for anything less than perfection. At least there was no room for it on a flight commanded by Boston Lowe. So this is weightlessness. Contrasted with her carefully polished veneer of sophistication, Maggie Robbins' girlish delight seemed even more ingenuous. Oh, my God, what a gas! Lack of, Cora Miles corrected her. Borden glanced back at the floating journalist. Well, me, I've always found weightlessness sort of a cross between approaching heaven and feeling like you're going to puke every minute, and you can quote me on that. Not sure I want to, Ken. Using the shuttle's built-in handhold, she carefully maneuvered herself around to face the front of the ship, hovering near the ceiling so she could watch the two pilots at work. I've never felt anything like it. Well, there isn't anything like it. Lowe turned his head. Watch yourself. There are instruments up there also near your left arm. Oh, sorry. Robbins adjusted her position, bumped her right leg, and stabilized herself. I'm still trying to get the hang of this. Her smile widened, so to speak. Absorbed in the swarm of readouts, Lowe didn't reciprocate. He'd smile later, when they'd finished the job. At this point, the shuttle was virtually flying itself. There was nothing to do now but wait until they caught up to the target when it swung back in close to Earth from the apogee of its orbit. Lowe leaned back in his straps, watching the heavens for the one point of light that would be moving faster than any of the others. Even Borden went silent when it finally appeared on their screens. There had been several unmanned flybys of asteroids out in the Mars-Jupiter belt. Robotic spacecraft took excellent pictures, but fared poorly when it came to expressing a sense of wonder. This was the first time in mankind's history that such an object had been seen close up by the unaided eye. Brink joined Robinson hovering behind the pilot's seat so that they could share in the historic first sighting. When she finally broke the ensuing silence, the journalist's words did not exactly rank with those of Armstrong or Glenn. Doesn't look like much, just another star. It's still a ways off. Miles jostled gently for a better view. Don't worry, it'll resolve itself soon enough. Their trajectories unimpeded by resistance of any kind. The distance between shuttle and visitor shrank with gratifying predictability. The dot became an oval, and then a solid shape possessed of a visible outline. It acquired depth and shadows. Lowe and Borden adjusted the shuttle's attitude, slowing it down and bringing them steadily closer to the silent, dark visitor. Miniature peaks and valleys became visible on the surface, along with evidence of multiple meteorite impacts. None of the craters were very deep, none of the twisted crags very high. A shrunken version of the moon, it was still more than big enough to dwarf the rendezvousing shuttle. Lowe wasted no time savoring the historic moment. As soon as they'd reached the predetermined position, he began slipping out of his harness. "Let's get going. Ken, she's all yours. Ludger?" The two men began slipping into their suits. Lowe pushed his feet down into the integral boots. "Remember, Ludger, the sooner we finish what we came for, the more time you'll have to conduct studies, but that doesn't mean we're going to rush it." "I have no inclination to do so, Commander." The scientist eyed Lowe unblinkingly. "I'm perfectly willing to save the Earth before I begin my real work." They were ready. A final check of communications, air and temperature settings, and then it was time to enter the compact airlock. As soon as the lock had been cleared, they opened the outer door and moved out into the yawning payload bay. The Earth gleamed exquisitely below them, framed by the black of space. Brink was already unsealing the digger, the special device designed for planting the explosives, and Lowe moved to help. The unit was as compact as its official name was long. Upon hearing it, Borden had instantly shortened it to Digger, and so it was subsequently known to all involved in the project. In space, there was no time to waste on protocol, whether human or mechanical. Since Brink was more familiar with the device, he let the scientists do most of the work, helping where and when requested. It was not complicated. It couldn't be, given the limited time allotted to the task. They had to plant the explosives, retreat to a safe distance, and fire them before the bolide careened back out into space on its wild path. And then they were heading up, toward the asteroid, the digger supported between them. They had no trouble securing it to the stony surface once Brink had paused long enough to do a headstand and caress the rock with both hands. They waited while the machine did its job quickly and efficiently, excavating a sure slot for the explosive. Drifting down to a second pre-selected location on the surface, they repeated the sequence before starting back to the shuttle. Once the unit had been restowed and locked down, they removed two remarkably small packets from a thickly padded container and retraced their path. Each package was roughly the size and shape of a scuba diver's tank. Working smoothly together, they emplaced the first in its waiting hole, and then the second. And then they were back in the airlock, holding, while the shuttle breathed on them, waiting for pressure to equalize. It was a relief to re-enter the main cabin. "What happens now?" Robbins was hovering nearby. "As soon as Houston gives us the all-clear," Borden told her, "we back off to a safe distance." "And then?" "We wait. Houston will detonate the explosives. If everything goes as planned, the object's orbit will be stabilized, and it'll stay with us instead of flying back out into space. At that point, we'll be able to rematch trajectories and hang with it for as many orbits as we're cleared to do." Lowe slid back into his seat. He knew he should be exhausted, but he was only anxious to finish the flight. "Everyone stabilize themselves, please. Maggie, I suggest you return to your seat and fasten your harness." They had moved to what was considered a more safe distance, but still what they were about to witness had never been tried before. There came a distant flash, disappointingly subdued. Lowe fancied he saw two distinct flares, even though he knew both charges were designed to go off simultaneously. They faded rapidly. There was, of course, no noise. What happens next? We wait. Borden nudged to control. We wait for several orbits until we find out if our little kick-in-the-rock sign did the trick. Find yourself something to do. It was during the interminable period that followed that Maggie Robbins proved herself an asset to the flight instead of simply another piece of cargo. While the others strove not to speculate on whether or not the mission had been a success or a failure, and largely failed, Robbins was everywhere, shooting video, asking questions, experimenting with her weightless condition, and generally doing her utmost to keep her companions occupied. In such a tense environment, even silly questions had the value of diversion. It wasn't journalism she'd been practicing then. It was therapy. The efficacy of a bug in the ear. Borden was looking at Lowe expectantly. "Houston calling, Commander." Lowe acknowledged. Within the cabin, all was silence. "I don't recognize the voice." He frowned, adjusted a control. There's lots of interference. Boston steps up to the plate. The voice announced excitedly from the speaker. Here's the pitch. It's a curve down the middle. Boston swings. It's a hit. A long drive, deep to left field. Kowalski's going back to the wall. He jumps. It's over. It's over. A home run for Boston. The fans are going wild. Laughter could be heard in the background. By now, everybody on board was smiling. Some wit at ground control had prepared for this moment by lining up a tape of an old Red Sox broadcast, substituting the name of the team for the name of the anonymous batter. Lowe was forced to grin in spite of himself. The implication of ground control's little game was obvious enough. Devoid of static, a more familiar voice came online. Congratulations, Commander Lowe, co-pilot Borden. Congratulations, all of you. Once more, the shuttle's thrusters were fired, raising her orbit and slowing her down. Before long, they were closing on their target for the second time. A deep gouge, where there had been none before, was clearly visible on the surface of the asteroid. Since the rays of the sun struck the object at an angle, they were unable to see very far into the newly created chasm. A second matching fissure lay somewhere further to the relative west of the one they were hovering above. Lowe turned toward the rear of the cockpit. "Are you ready for your stroll in the park, Ludger?" But the scientist was already pulling himself toward the rear of the cabin and the row of waiting suits. Lowe slid out of his chair. "Are you sure this is perfectly safe?" Robbins followed Lowe. "A little late to be wondering, isn't it, Maggie?" He looked over at her. "You can back out any time." How much instruction and practice had she been given groundside, he wondered. This was crazy, taking a complete novice for an EVA. He would have preferred to spend the time inspecting the asteroid and assisting Brink instead of wet-nursing a talkative journalist. For the second time in a day, he found himself outside, hovering in the shuttle's gaping bay. It blocked most of the sunlight, which fell unimpeded on the asteroid's surface. He could hear Robbins breathing hard, but as they moved toward the rocky surface, it slowed. With Brink on his right, he adjusted his attitude so that they would make contact close to the crevice they had blasted in the surface. Sooner than seemed possible, they were down. Lowe heard Robbins suck in her breath as they approached the rim of the abyss. He tried not to smile. "Easy, Maggie. Remember, you can't fall in. There's no gravity here. You're already falling constantly." He peered into the dark crevice. Their suit lights illuminated only a portion of the upper reaches. The two men discussed the proposed descent. The only danger would take the form of a sharp projection or overhang that could entrap them or possibly puncture their suits. They didn't expect to encounter any. The upper regions would be smooth as a result of the residual heat from the explosion. Indeed, the surface in their immediate vicinity exhibited all the classic signs of having been turned molten and then rapidly cooled. It was a landscape as designed by Gaudi. Brink was preparing to use a quick puff from his thrusters to drop down when the unexpected happened. There shouldn't have been an unexpected. Everything had been worked out in advance, every possibility accounted for. That was nature for you, Lowe thought. Just when you were getting comfortable with the view, she upped and smacked you in the face with something, or in this case, with an entire extraterrestrial body. Beneath them, the ground had begun to move. There was no sound, only a subtle vibration that communicated itself not to their ears so much as to their very bones. Around them, the surface of the asteroid quivered visibly. Loosened chunks of surface material broke free and began to drift out into space. From within the fissure, more material was jolted loose and came floating slowly toward them. Small nickel-iron boulders were easily nudged aside by gloved hands. Fortunately, none of them had sharp edges. The flurry of dislodged fragments had all but ceased when a brilliant shaft of Borden shifted his gaze from the instrumentation back to the object itself. "Boss, talk to me, man." "No need to worry," Lowe responded. "The ground stopped moving. There's just the light." Whoa, now there's not even that. Lowe was floating directly above the hole in the asteroid, staring downward. "There's still something glowing inside the crevice. Ludger?" Brink activated his suit thrusters. "I'm going in." He started down. Lowe followed, keeping an eye on the persistent, absurd glow from below. "Son of a bitch," a voice mumbled. His own, he determined. Below them, lodged in the bedrock of the asteroid, was the source of the brilliant light that had for an instant so thoroughly and electrifyingly captured their attention. It flickered pallidly, no less wondrous for its present lack of intensity. The feeble light it was generating clearly came from somewhere within. It was a plate of some kind, round and curved on top, unmistakably the product of sophisticated machining. It had not been formed, or condensed, or precipitated out. It had been made. Lowe turned his lips toward his helmet pickup. "Ken, we've uncovered what looks like a machine-made metal plate that's inscribed with markings. It could possibly be, I say this reservedly, some kind of writing, but we don't know that yet." Brink was running his gloved fingers over the indentations. "It is clearly of artificial origin, as are the engravings or indentations that cover its surface. The source of the intermittent internal light remains a mystery. It seems to emanate from the metal itself." Robbins pushed closer. "You think there might be more plates?" "Perhaps." He dug carefully. "Or, if we are lucky, something more." Using Brink's assortment of tools, they unearthed nothing else, but they were able to loosen the plate. The scientist slipped his gloved hands beneath the artifact. "Careful," Lowe said warningly. Brink smiled back at him. "No sharp edges, Commander. I checked. Will you give me a hand? It weighs nothing, of course, but I wouldn't want to accidentally jam it against a wall and break it in half." With Robbins looking on and commenting excitedly, the two men easily raised the plate from its resting place. "Hey, have either of you two looked under the plate yet?" Carefully setting the artifact aside, Lowe and Brink turned back to face its original location. There was a hole where it had rested, a very deep hole, a shaft. Robbins jabbed a hand past Lowe. "Over there, in the ground." Her excitement broke his concentration. She'd spotted another plate protruding from the fractured surface. No, not another plate. He saw, on closer inspection, 3 of them. It took only moments to extract the additional plates and stack them off to one side. That still left the mystery of the open shaft, which was not about to resolve itself. Using his thrusters and warning Robbins to keep some distance between them, he started down, following the light. The shaft ran perfectly straight into the body of the asteroid. There were no side branches or offshoots, nothing to mar the smooth, satiny interior surface. As they descended, Lowe thought he felt weight returning. That was impossible, of course, as impossible as the shaft of light and the plates, which was to say, it wasn't impossible at all. Through the faceplate of his helmet, Brink's expression was a mix of awe and puzzlement. "It's very strange. I'm starting to feel quite myself, yet we continue to descend at the same speed. If it is gravity returning, it is not gravity as we know it." "There's more than one kind of gravity?" Lowe wondered out loud. "Well, it would seem so. Either that or we are being affected by forces of which we have no knowledge and cannot yet identify." "So long as we don't fall." Tilting back his head, Lowe saw the dark circlet that was the top of the shaft continuing to recede. If the unnatural condition could not be reversed, they were going to have trouble retracing their path. He had no time to contemplate the possible alternatives, because at that moment the shaft opened out into a huge chamber. Clearly not a consequence of their explosive efforts, it boasted gently curving walls and a domed roof. In places, the walls were covered with more of the distinctive inscriptions, and others they bulged with fluid, free-form shapes. The ceiling and floor were likewise decorated. Brink studied the seamless floor. There was no sign of seal, joint, rivet, screw, or other fastening or connection point. The entire floor might well have been poured out whole and entire. Bouncing like hurdlers, they took stock of their surroundings. Light came, not from fixtures, but from the building material itself. Lowe checked his gauges. All remained null. They were being illuminated by radiation that, according to his suit instrumentation, didn't radiate. As far as he was concerned, that was a phenomenon that ranked right up there with artificial gravity. "I think we've done pretty well for a half-hour's hunting." He turned to Brink. "We better try to figure out a way back. It'll be interesting to see if our suits can generate enough thrust to push us back up that shaft. With a wave of one arm, he encompassed the expansive chamber. There's too much here to try to inspect on one EVA anyway. This is a job for a properly equipped, long-term expedition. I believe there's something of interest directly ahead. Brink continued to lead the way. He took another long leap toward the prominent, stalagmite-like structure that lay directly ahead. The metal swirl thrust up from the floor like a sharp dimple in the surface of a balloon. Stolid and featureless, it was as much an enigma as everything else they'd seen. Lowe leaped high for a look at the summit, while Brink and Robbins explored the base. As he drifted down from his jump, Robbins' ebullient squeal echoed in his ear. "Commander! I mean, Boston, come, look at this!" One side of the pedestal or column was marred by multiple depressions. They were much deeper than the inscriptions that covered the other parts of the chamber. All four were circular, shallow, and approximately a yard in diameter. The 4 plates, Robin wore the expression of one who had just uncovered an alien Rosetta Stone, they'd fit these holes exactly. Maggie is correct. Brink smiled through his faceplate at Lowe. What do you suppose might happen, Commander, if we were to place them in these empty receptacles? Oh, probably nothing. Lowe bent to study the depressions. Like the rest of the column, or for that matter the floor and the ceiling, they were utterly featureless. Maybe this is a giant alien dishwasher and they'll pop back out all nice and shiny, or maybe they're the components of a giant bomb and we'll all be blown to kingdom come. He shot a look at Brink. I don't think it's a very good idea. Well, let's try, Boston. Robbins was insistent. If nothing happens, we can take the plates back to the ship. Well, Commander? Brink was staring expectantly. Are you game? Is that a scientific proposal? Lowe considered. Using the plates meant returning to the top of the shaft where they'd been left. It would give him a chance to find out how effective their suit thrusters would be against the artificial gravity. The experiment would make things close airwise, but if they moved fast, they could manage it. You get 2, he told Brink decisively, and I'll bring the others. What about me? Robbins protested. Lowe hesitated, then unhooked her. You stay here and make sure the aliens don't run off with the holes. Oh, very funny. Ha-ha. No wonder they never ask astronauts to host Saturday Night Live. The recovery and transference of the alien plates gave Lowe an opportunity to examine them at length. Save for the inscriptions, they were utterly featureless. There was nothing on the mound to indicate where they might be expected to go, or if indeed they were designed to fit into the empty depressions on its flank. Would you like to do the honors, Commander? Lowe turned to the scientist. No, I wouldn't think of it, Ludger. This was your idea. It comes under the heading of archaeological exposition. You represent the science portion of this team. You do it. This hardly requires an advanced engineering degree. Brink took the topmost plate and carefully pushed it into one of the matching depressions on the side of the mound. As soon as they saw it wouldn't fall out, Lowe started passing the remaining plates to his colleagues. When Brink filled the last depression with the 4th and final plate, Robbins inhaled expectantly. Nothing happened to justify her mildly melodramatic reaction. The 4 plates occupied the 4 depressions with as much elan as they had the rocks surrounding the top of the shaft. Lowe checked his chronometer. I'm afraid I'm going to have to call an end to recess. It's time to get back to the ship. Yes, of course. Brink reached for the plate he'd just inserted. I think between the 3 of us we will have no trouble to bring these 4 along. His fingertips never contacted the metal. Did you see that? Did you see it? Robbins exclaimed as the scientist hastily withdrew his hand. I saw it. Lowe was backpedaling in the weak gravity. Everybody get clear. Move away. The single bright blue spark that had jumped from the plate to Brink's suit had caused no evident damage, but it wasn't an event either the scientist or Lowe had any desire to see repeated. As the 3 of them retreated, more sparks flared, leaping from plate to plate. Others erupted and began to flash about the circumference of the mound like blue crates overdosed on hormones. They jerked and twitched in an orgy of electronic alien lust, occasionally burrowing into the vitreous substance of the mound itself, at other times singeing the vacuum around them. Lights of different hues began to pulse within the mound, which had taken on the appearance of a tower of metallic glass. The opaque plates stood out starkly against the increasingly translucent structure. By now the metallic circles were wholly involved in dazzling bursts of intensely colored light, and it was impossible to look directly at them. All about them the chamber was coming alive, and they were trapped in its heaving gut. The shaft. Use full power on your thrusters." As Lowe gave the order, he ran his own fingers over the relevant controls and felt himself beginning to rise. The suit propulsion unit possessed just enough thrust to counter the feeble artificial gravity. As they rose higher, the gravity weakened and the strain on the suit motor gradually decreased. Robbins performed admirably, letting Lowe tow her. He would have complimented her, but he didn't feel he could spare the time. Gravity was increasing. Despite the best efforts of their suit thrusters, they were drifting not up toward the entrance of the shaft, but down, back toward the lambent, electrified floor. They came down not far from the tower, surrounded by anarchic bursts of light. Since they hadn't been fried, electrocuted, or microwaved by now, Lowe decided it was possible that they might live to contemplate future dilemmas. Whatever the cause and purpose of all the acrobatic energy dancing around them, it did not seem to be designed to kill. The display had been sparked, as it were, by the insertion of the 4 plates into the tower. If even one of these plates could be removed, it was conceivable the circus of light would cease, and conditions would return to what they had been earlier. Quiet would return, and gravity would once more fall to a level they could escape. Brink agreed readily with the commander's analysis as they touched down. Lowe got there first and reached for the nearest plate, trying not to think about the voltage of the sparks that by this time nearly obscured the inscribed surface. Remembering how Brink had done it, he hooked his fingers into the deepest inscription. Immediately the plate began to move. Away from him. Jerking his hands back in surprise, he watched as the plate sank into the solid matter of the tower, falling in and down as if they were sinking through gelatin. When he tentatively reached for the plate a second time, his fingers contacted what felt like solid material. With every passing moment, the plates sank deeper and deeper into the base of the mound. Their descent halted about a yard above the floor level, where they began to move toward one another. As they touched, they began to change shape, flowing and melting to form a single, malleable, non-Euclidean construct. To Lowe's astonished eyes, the result resembled a child's toy jack more than anything else, except that the angles of the spikes were all wrong. The conclusion of the process was marked by a burst of intense crimson light, which expanded outward from the tower's center like a ring of fire, and which nearly defeated the lens-darkening response time of their faceplates. As it was, all 3 of them threw up their arms reflexively to shield their eyes. They felt nothing. No heat, no shockwave. When Lowe had at last blinked away enough lingering stars to see clearly once more, he saw that the spiked shape at the center of the mound had been replaced by a coldly burning ball, no bigger than his fist. "Well," he muttered tersely, "so much for removing the plates." He looked up and back to where the bottom of the shaft now seemed impossibly far overhead. An experimental step turned into a respectable stride. Fluctuate the gravity might, but it was still less than Earth normal. Maybe if he and Brink gave Robbins, who weighed less in proportion to her gear than anyone else, a running boost or shove, she might achieve escape velocity. A murmured command into his helmet pickup returned nothing but static, hardly surprising in view of the amount of free energy that continued to crackle and flare around them. It had lessened somewhat since the melding of the 4 plates into the single ball, but was still too intense and dominating to permit communication with the shuttle. In the shuttle, Borden and Miles stared out of the port. The asteroid was changing. Before their eyes, its shape and appearance were being altered by silent, unimaginable forces. Whatever the object really was, it was no asteroid. Shafts of tinted lightning, as broad in diameter as the shuttle, coursed over and through its surface like skittish fish contained in a too small aquarium. The shuttle's main instrument console began to vibrate discreetly beneath Borden's fingers, and he jerked them back as it burnt. And then it happened. Not to the alien object, but around it. The star field in his line of sight seemed to twist like candy sprinkles cast into molten licorice. His brain tried to adjust and failed. The object lurched 10 yards to its right, blew off light like a bursting bulb, and vanished. Adrift amid oceans of preternatural calm, there were continents. Each wore a reddish-pink halo of algae bloom in which fan-tailed sievers of bloated mien held court, arcing and diving like pale prima donnas in a perpetual alien pas de deux. In the south-central part of one rosy-tinged ocean, out of sight of the nearest continent, a rocky, bowl-shaped island surrounded by a handful of smaller islets thrust out of the sea from a stabilized volcanic bed. The unasteroid appeared above them, descending through the twilight sky. Slowly it hovered for long moments, while instruments within communicated with instruments situated below. Then, and only then, did it gently lower itself into a waiting-lined depression in the rock. It was Brink who first noticed that a gauge on his arm was signaling the presence of external atmosphere. When it had begun to infiltrate their formerly airless prison, no one could say, but their suits pronounced it eminently inhalable. Despite Lowe's cautionary protestations, the scientist was quick to crack his helmet seal. The commander did not argue over much. All three of them were nearly out of air anyway. What happens now? Robbins was trying to unfasten the arm camera from the sleeve of her suit. Lowe considered the situation. Well, we try to get back in touch with the shuttle somehow. The manipulator arm won't reach very far down the fissure, but if it's still clear of debris, then Ken could lower a line to us. Drop us some refills for our suit tanks first, of course, and then never came about, because one wall began to groan like an old cyclops with a bad stomach, and an opening appeared in the side of the asteroid. There was no visible door. The wall simply separated and crinkled back in upon itself like a torn sheet of aluminum foil. Lowe took a cautious step toward the portal. You know what? I don't think we're in geosynchronous orbit above Kansas anymore. Should have listened to the dog, Robbins replied uneasily. The dog always had more sense than any of them. Yeah, tell it to the wizard. Lowe was striding purposefully toward the light. At this point, I'm willing to believe he just might be hanging around. At different milieu, if I am interpreting the reference correctly, Brink followed them closely. I see no Emerald City, Commander. They exited simultaneously, and even the redoubtably loquacious Robbins was at a loss for words. The gleaming outer surface of what had once looked like an asteroid was mirror-smooth and non-reflective. The object now rested in a hollow that had been gouged into the ground, or that had been prepared to receive it. Beyond and around there was only air, sea, sky, and plant life. The silhouettes of two moons hung conveniently in the sky, proclaiming with lunar finality the alienness of their location. The spires that dominated the surrounding islets hinted at the presence of additional otherworldly revelations. Smooth of side, they pierced the silent alien sky like needles, mysterious messengers removed from their bottles. At this distance, Lowe could not tell whether they were solid or hollow. If hollow, he found himself wondering, what might they contain? On another plane of existence, which occupied a region indescribable in human terms, the warm breeze and the meteorological mechanics that had generated it remained imperceptible. It was the same with the diffused sunlight and the sweet-smelling air. In their place, other realities, other perceptions held sway. Time and space fraternized in a flurry of vulgar mathematics, with the result that both became bastardized. Amid this confusion of totality, a multiplicity of intelligences were present, riding the currents of a deformed actuality like so many moondoggies, surfing a succession of predictable curls. This they did effortlessly, pushing themselves along with earnest thought waves, interconnecting with lazy notions, rising and falling on the back of abstruse speculations. Others have come, declared the presence nearest the unexpected new disturbance. Initially perceived as a ripple in reality, on closer inspection, the intrusion had resolved itself into a trio of intelligent physicalities. It was a surprise that engendered casual inspection, but no hope. Again? The response took the form of a voiceless chorus, a coordinated disturbance of subatomic particles that came together with the usual perfect dreary unity. So it would seem. Without eyes, the discoverer gazed speculatively upon the bipeds as they moved hesitantly through the tumid slipstream that was the real universe. These are different from any who have come before, as those who preceded them differed from their predecessors. The new presence stank of the same resigned ennui that afflicted them all. It is ever the same. They will be no more successful than any of the others. On this point there was universal agreement. It was not voiced or felt, it simply was, and by virtue of being became simultaneously known to any who had an interest. Of these there were few, boredom having largely obliterated all but the last traces of curiosity among those who were present. Nevertheless, several persisted. Stubbornness, too, was a means for combating boredom. "They don't look like much," remarked another presence as it hovered directly above the new arrivals. Maggie Robbins put a hand to her stomach. "Didn't you feel something just now?" Brink sidled over to the journalist. "Spirits, Maggie? Ghosts? Übermenschen? What?" "I don't know any German, Luger, you know that." She turned away. "I just thought I felt something, that's all." "Gas," he suggested pithily. "Wind on your cheeks within and without." His gaze roved the landscape. "It is clear that the object we believe to be an asteroid is in reality some kind of automatic transport. When activated, it returns automatically to this place. We found the key and unwittingly engaged its systems." Brink knelt to examine a white rock full of tiny clear crystals. "It brought us here." "Fine, so we're the greatest explorers since Columbus. I'd still like to know where here is." She tried not to think of food. "Columbus?" Brink looked up from the crystals. "Columbus was a neighborhood layabout compared to us. This is a find of the ages. What we have done ranks with the discovery of the wheel of fire." The journalist eyed a tree that was short on leaves and long on spray-tipped needles. "I'd rather discover a cheeseburger. We may need wheels and fires before we're through here." Lowe leaned back to study the cliffs before them. None appeared insurmountable, but it would be easier and smarter to find a way through or around instead of trying to go over. He had no idea what he hoped to find, only he knew that it was better to be searching than to stand around waiting for fate to intervene. "Patience, Commander." Brink held the cluster of crystals up to the light. "I share your anxieties, but can you not take a moment to contemplate the wonder of what is happening to us? We have accomplished a marvel." "Have we? I'm not so sure we've done that much. Given enough time, rats in a maze will eventually find the bait, but it still doesn't make them any more than clever rats. It's not like we found plans and built a space drive." Brink was not discouraged. "Well, then, let us at least explore the maze." He smiled thinly. "Perhaps we may find the bait." "That's what I had in mind." So saying, the commander turned and started off toward the cleft in the rocks. Besides native rock, they passed ruined walls of strange plastic metal and collapsed arches of some unidentifiable ceramic material. Brink had given up his study of the geology and the vegetation in favor of scrutinizing the profusion of ruins. Certainly any hope of finding a way home lay within alien walls and not with the indigenous flora and fauna. "Since we are now embarked in what might better be described as an archaeological dig," he ventured unexpectedly, "perhaps it would be best if I were to take charge." More amused than bemused, Lowe stopped and pondered a moment. "Now look, Luger, I don't think of anybody as being in charge here. We're all in the same boat, and we're too small a group to worry about formalities. If anyone comes up with any good ideas, they need to broach them. We'll analyze and decide together." "Naturally. Well, if nothing else, I can at least name this place." "Well, me, I'd just call it Island," Robbins quipped. "I'm sorry, but I must disagree. So lofty a discovery deserves grander nomenclature. I would prefer to call it Cocytus." Robbins frowned. "Is that a Germanic name?" The scientist smiled slightly. "Not exactly. In Dante's Inferno, Cocytus was the name of the ninth circle of hell. Intimidating it may sound, but it was also the way back to the outer world." "Well, charming. Oh, well, if you insist, I suppose it carries a greater cachet than Island." To her credit, Robbins didn't sulk. "Not a particularly hellish place," Lowe demurred. "You said you've been to the Sahara and the Gobi. Except for better communications, I'd rank both worse than this." "Cocytus it is, then." He resumed his climb, and the others followed, Brink discoursing on the nature of the ruined walls and half-buried structures between which they were passing. "See how they argue and debate." The presence that made the observation drifted high above the trio. as they left the asteroid transport behind and made their way toward the center of the island. High above was only a relative spatial designation. Elsewhere proximate would have been a more accurate description. To what end? They amble about, perhaps not aimlessly, but with no real end in mind. They have solved nothing, done nothing. They stare and do not see. They listen and do not hear. Watching those who were watching the bipeds was the entire population of that world, who, in deference to the new arrival's whim, would henceforth refer to themselves as Cocytans. It was a lark, and, as something new, much appreciated. It would last as long as the bipeds themselves lasted, which, given their aimless meandering and obviously brief lifespan, would doubtless not be long.
Help them!
Whispered 5 of the presences. Help them! Concurred the rest of the populace. It will be of no value. It never is. We can but try. We have nothing but time. A wisp of color flashed in the air before them. Not a flame, but the ghost of it. It flickered. Never more than a suggestion of a shape, never more than an indistinct outline. As manifestations went, it was disappointingly insubstantial. As they stared speculatively, it circled, forcing them to turn slowly and follow its progress. The outline it formed varied in size, but never in density. Lowe had seen far thicker fog. After circling them twice, it appeared to shoot up the canyon and off to their left, each time attenuating to nothingness. Returning, it repeated the sequence. Was there a face buried in that color and mist? Robins fancied she saw one, but it never lingered or held its shape long enough for her to be certain. A daylight dream, it vanished completely after executing the second run up the canyon. I thought it was suggesting we should bear to the left, Maggie insisted. Lowe was patient with her. Come on, Maggie, we can't start relying on lights in the sky for direction. Why not? She eyed him challengingly. Given our knowledge of this place, which is to say none, it seems as good an indicator as anything else. Lowe looked at Brink, who shrugged. The commander considered the canyon ahead. Might as well go left as right anyway. All right, we'll take a hint from your light, Maggie, and if it leads to a vertical cliff, you can be the first one to jump off. Fine. She strode past them and took the lead. He followed silently. There were times when he'd acted on the result of a coin flip, so why not on the vagaries of an inexplicable light? If nothing else, its appearance had been worthwhile because it had energized the journalist and at least momentarily taken her mind off of their unfortunate circumstances. See? Having exhausted itself with the effort, the first discoverer addressed the others. They are not entirely bereft of perceptual ability. But excuse my dissipation. That was quite a strain. Despite maximal exertion, a brief flicker was as much as any of them could impinge any more on the real world.
An admirable effort, but to limited effect.
A dozen decriers swirled nearby.
Perhaps if I try again.
Avid supporters gathered around the first. I cannot. The attempt has left me spent. Perhaps later. Any non-corporeal being would be weakened by the effort of trying to impact on the physical world. They must proceed now on their own. But if another wishes to try... None did. Among those so inclined, none had the strength or talent. They could only flow and observe, drifting as easily through the rock beneath the travelers' feet as through the air above their heads. Lowe was tiring of ruined walls and crumbling structures. Look, we're not going to find anything up here. We should have gone the other way. At which point Robbins halted and pointed. Is that so? Isn't that another one of those metal plates, the kind we used on the asteroid? The scientist shaded his eyes. I believe you're right, Maggie. He hurried forward, the others following. It might have been a little larger than the 4 plates they had used to activate the asteroid ship, but there was no mistaking the shape, the way the inscriptions were laid out, or the soft charcoal gray sheen. Let's take it back to the asteroid and see if it fits into the dome, Lowe suggested. Maybe it'll kick the thing into reverse. Maybe it'll do something. It's certainly worth a try, Brink agreed. Spreading out, they dug at the loose dirt and gravel until they could slide their fingers under the plate's curving edge. Despite their best efforts, it would not come free. Lying prone and squinting, Lowe continued to scratch dirt from beneath the metal. It set in a groove of some kind. Additional work reduced the height of the surrounding soil until they had room to shove the disc to one side. It shifted reluctantly to its right, sliding on ancient bearings. They probably shouldn't have been surprised, but were, when a shaft was revealed beneath. It was wider and not as deep as the one that led them to the asteroid's interior. "I can see the bottom." Robbins leaned over to peer cautiously down. "There's a smooth floor and some loose rock." She took a step back from the opening. "It looks like debris that's fallen in." "The result of natural weathering processes," Brink explained. "There is no vacuum here to preserve structural integrity." He glanced over at Lowe. "If you would like to be the first to enter, Commander, I will gladly defer." "Ludger, I think archaeology is probably more your line. I'm liable to disturb something when I don't even know what I'm looking at. You go first." Brink nodded. Slipping his legs into the gap, he started to turn, intending to grip the inner edge of the shaft and then lower himself as far as possible by his hands before dropping free. "It's not bad," he informed them, "if I can just reach—" There was the sound of rock giving way, and Robin screamed, "Look out!" as she stumbled backward. Lowe dove forward, grabbing for the scientist's wrists, but he was too late. Brink lost his grip and fell. Instead of quieting, the rumbling and grinding grew more intense. "Get back!" Lowe yelled at Robbins as he scrambled backwards. The warning was unnecessary. She was already retreating. The entire section of ground in which the shaft opening was embedded promptly gave way, collapsing into the chamber below. Dust and echoes rose from the cave-in, accompanied by a single muted curse in German. And then there was silence, broken only by the plastic click of the broken rock settling into place. Lowe rose and brushed at his coveralls. The opening at his feet was now some 20 feet across. "Maggie, are you all right?" She was standing on the far side of the hole that had opened in the ground, cautiously peering down and waving at the dust which continued to drift upward. "Ludger! Ludger!" There was no response. Treading carefully and testing his footing before putting down his weight, Lowe walked around the opening to rejoin her. The ceiling collapse had left a pile of rubble that reached nearly down to ground level, offering a comparatively easy way down. Of their companion there was no sign. As they searched, they spared an occasional glance for the underground chamber in which they found themselves. It was enormous, much larger than the interior of the asteroid. As with that vehicle, pale illumination emanated directly from the walls and floor. The ceiling, however, gave off no light. Either that part of the system had failed, or this chamber was differently designed. As a result, the illumination was dimmer than it had been aboard the transport. Lowe's examination of their new surroundings was interrupted by a cry from Robbins. "Oh, my God!" Darting forward, she knelt and began pulling at something sticking out of the pile of detritus. An arm. It seemed to take forever before they had enough of the rock shifted to be able to drag Brink's body from the heap. The scientist's eyes were shut. Rock dust covered him from head to foot, and he was badly bruised and scraped. The multitude of small cuts, however, paled beside the deep bruise above his temple. Robin's professional demeanor was badly shaken. "It can't be. We haven't been here half a day." "Doesn't matter how long we've been here." Lowe spoke quietly, evenly. "If we'd been here a week, he'd still be just as dead." It sounded harsher than he intended. He looked away from her. "There's nothing we can do." Maggie Robbins had flung herself against Lowe and was pounding her fists into his chest. The startled commander tried to grab her wrists, but she was much stronger than she looked. At least, he reflected, she wasn't hitting him in the face. How much of her anger was directed at him and how much at their latest misfortune he was unable to tell. She quickly enlightened him. "You son of a bitch, you told him to try that entrance." "Now just a minute, Maggie." He finally succeeded in getting a grip on her forearms and held her off. She had been so completely in control of herself, so utterly professional up till now, that the sudden emotional flare-up had caught him completely by surprise. He nodded curtly at the crumpled body of their companion. "Would you feel better if it was me lying over there instead of Brink?" She hesitated, took one last futile swing at him, and then yanked her arms away. Wiping her eyes, she discovered that she was annoyed at herself more than at Lowe, not only for losing control, but for making an insupportable accusation. She realized suddenly that she had been putting off the enormity of what had happened to them. Brink's death had shattered the wall she'd erected between her emotions and this strange new reality. She'd allowed one wonder after another to mask an unpleasant inevitability. Now it had all come crashing down at her at once, clear and sharp in her mind. Brink was dead, they weren't going home, and she'd never see her friends or family again, and in a few days, or if they were lucky a few weeks, she and Lo would be dead too. With that, she whirled and stomped off in the opposite direction, no particular destination in mind, knowing only that she wanted to get away from him. Lo started after her and then halted. She was upset, frustrated, and badly frightened. She had every right to be. There was nothing he could do about it. Aloneness and isolation would calm her down faster than he could. They'd just listen and wouldn't shout back. When she got tired of railing at invisible demons, she'd come looking for him. She was a rational, reasonable individual, and he doubted it would permanently strain their relationship. Did they have a relationship? Whatever it was, he would deal with it as circumstances required. Turning, he resumed his inspection of the grand chamber, during which time he identified 5 high arches set into the meandering wall. They might have been works of art or simple designs intended to break the monotony of the interior, but to his eye they more closely resembled doorways that had been tightly sealed. All 5 were uniform in appearance and construction. The small tunnel, he found, was not blocked, and this he was able to explore. Pulling the compact flashlight from his utility belt, he gave the interior a quick once-over before returning to the main chamber. A metal plate lay nearby. Its discovery ought to have excited him. Instead, he only felt a mild elation. It was frustrating to know that you had tools in your hand in the form of the plates, but not know how to use them. Nevertheless, he carefully picked it up and snugged it under his arm. 4 similar plates had activated the asteroid ship. Whether 4 more would reactivate it and send it speeding back to Earth, he had no way of knowing. But first he needed to find 3 more. At least now he had a goal, and it gave him something to do besides stumble about blindly in the hope that Providence would intervene on his behalf. If nothing else, the plate was heavy, solid, and comfortingly real. He intended to leave it near the base of the rubble pile, that being as convenient a rendezvous as any, but as he was starting back, he noticed a depression in one of the many console bulges in the wall. Like the others he'd seen, it was also studded with slots and strange gouges. Its proximity to the plate, which had been lying loose on the tunnel floor, was too much of a coincidence to ignore. Loath to give up the plate, Lo hesitated before the depression. What if it sank out of sight, absorbed by the substance that composed the wall? That's what had happened to the plates aboard the asteroid ship. He held his prize up to the depression. It would fit perfectly. He would have consulted Maggie, but she had taken herself elsewhere, and Brink was no longer around to offer counsel. Reaching a decision, he slipped the plate into the concave receptacle. It fit flush with the wall. A soft humming became audible, only occasionally interrupted by the grind of centuries passing. His heart sank along with the plate as it melted into the material of the wall. From previous experience he knew it was now unrecoverable. Well, it had been worth the experiment, he decided, refusing to be discouraged. The console into which the plate had vanished began to pulse with a glow unlike the light that emanated from the walls and the floor. The grinding sound came not from the sinking of the plate into the depression, nor from the presence of blowing sand, but from a nearby section of floor. Lo kept his distance until the passageway was completely revealed. Approaching cautiously, he peered over and down. The same soft, pleasing refulgence that illuminated the big chamber also allowed him to see into the room below. Instead of arcane bulges and mysterious swellings, it was filled with an assortment of devices and artifacts, all in varying states of preservation or decrepitude. There was a ladder of sorts, a bizarre arrangement of bars and steps that resembled something lifted out of a bombed-out school playground. Clambering down as best he could, he found himself standing in what reminded him, more than anything else, of an old janitorial storeroom. Nothing was stored carefully. The jumble of devices had the appearance of an afterthought, as though they had been dumped there at the last minute. The last minute before what? He found himself wondering. Careful to disturb nothing, he moved from one artifact to the next, inspecting but not touching. Was any of this alien junk still functional? And if so, how could he divine individual functions? He halted before one that caught his attention, not because it was unique of design or remarkable of appearance, but because it seemed better preserved than anything else in the room. Dust and grime did not coat its every exposed surface, and there were faint suggestions of recent automatic lubrication. He let his fingers train along the smooth, machined flanks. No circular metal plate bulged from the artifact's middle or protruded from within. Therefore, he was more than a little startled when a soft click sounded. He retreated hurriedly, ready to scramble up the alien ladder should the device exhibit hostile tendencies. It did nothing of the sort. Instead, it continued to squat in the shadows and hum softly to itself. He studied it closely. The front was studded with multiple projections that might have been tools. But tools for what? The squat device might be anything, from a floor cleaner to a portable dentist. One thing was fairly evident. It had reacted to his presence and was continuing to do so. Lowe walked carefully around the device, never taking his eyes from it. As he circled, the machine pivoted patiently to face him. Defensive posture, he wondered, or simply a standard program reaction to movement? He could always give it a swift kick and observe the reaction. Of course, if it was equipped to defend itself, that wouldn't be a very bright idea. Besides, he doubted it was the accepted way to activate any useful functions. The multiplicity of devices bristling from its front side continued to intrigue him. Would any operate the console mount in the asteroid? He discarded that thought quickly. Despite its armory of instruments, the machine boasted nothing resembling the large metal plates that had set the asteroid ship in motion. It was self-evidently too heavy to carry, even assuming it would allow the attempt. Could it climb? It certainly had limbs enough. There was one way to find out. He started up the ladder. After a moment's hesitation, the machine followed. It displayed surprising agility while following in his wake. It slipped once, but did not fall. Approaching the nearest arch, he scrutinized the inscriptions and indentations etched into one side. They might be control surfaces, loud warnings, elegant hieroglyphics, or nothing more than some kind of elaborate alien graffiti. Nothing to lose by trying, he told himself. Turning, he gestured broadly at the machine. "Can you do anything with this? Is there anything that can be done with this other than to admire the workmanship?" The device squatted on its legs, indifferent to his entreaty. It was attendant upon him, but otherwise non-reactive. Stymied, he walked slowly around the machine, watching as it once again turned to face him. At the completion of the circuit, he found an idea waiting for him. Another half-circle placed the device between him and the arch. Now he started deliberately forward. Responding, the little machine retreated proportionally. What would it do when it ran out of room? Skitter off to one side, or jump him, alien instruments whirring and clanking? With the wall at its back, the machine pivoted abruptly and rammed itself into the unyielding obstacle. For a crazy moment, Lowe found himself wondering if it intended to commit some kind of outlandish mechanical hara-kiri. Edging forward, he saw that several of the instruments located on the machine's front end were moving, sliding into slots, filling holes, and caressing grooves. Though he watched carefully, he knew it was a pattern he could not duplicate. For one thing, he did not possess the requisite number of limbs. A deep hum sprang from within the arch, and Lowe tensed. Something whirred like a giant gyroscope. The machine withdrew its tools and trundled backward. Together, they watched as the barrier seemed to melt in on itself, to reveal a high, imposing portal beneath the arch. Lowe marked the phenomenon with something approaching awe, while the device gazed upon its handiwork with the same unvarying, phlegmatic mechanical stare. A large tunnel stretched off into the distance. No circle of light gleamed at its end, no comforting gleam of sunshine. To his right stood a raised platform. Alongside it was a transparent sphere that might have been fashioned from pure quartz, flawless glass, or, more likely, some completely unknown material. For all Lowe knew, it was an artificial diamond, though it more closely resembled a hollowed pearl. Entering the tunnel, He ascended the platform and cautiously rested one hand against the beautiful clear material. Inside, he saw a peculiar bench or bed or storage rack. Having no knowledge of Cocyton anatomy, he had no way of identifying its proper function. The interior was large enough to hold several people, or one alien, he wondered. The entrance to the sphere was round and doorless. Once inside, he searched in vain for anything resembling a switch, button, or lever. There was nothing. No console, no floor controls, not even a light panel. Only the peculiar flowing bench and the dark tunnel ahead. Leaning forward, he saw that the floor of the tunnel was deeply grooved right up to the base of the sphere. The inference was obvious, but not the mechanism. The presence of a track indicated that the sphere was intended to travel along it, though by what means of propulsion he couldn't imagine. There were no signs of an engine, exhaust, rocket ports, or wheels. It suggested that motive power was supplied not by the sphere, but by the groove, or perhaps the tunnel itself. Of one thing he was certain. The sphere was intended for local transport only. It would not get them 1,000th of a light year closer to Earth, which left open the question of just where did it go? Climbing onto the platform, he found himself marveling at the material. It looked like polished wood, until he bent close and discovered that he could see partway into its brown depths. Nothing here was completely solid. He found himself wondering if the effect was intentional or simply a byproduct of Cocyton manufacturing techniques. Maybe staring hard at the bench was the accepted method of activation, or perhaps his weight tripped some concealed mechanism within the bench, or possibly the weight of ages had resulted in a longer than normal delay in departure. Whatever the cause, the opening behind him irised shut, encasing him within the sphere. The door had materialized out of nothingness, in much the same fashion as the archway to the grand chamber had disappeared before him. Light bloomed on the surface of the sphere, both within and without. What had he gotten himself into? The air remained fresh and plentiful, for now. Had he indeed misinterpreted the machine's function? Was it indeed part of some local transportation system? Or the Cocyton version of a high-end mousetrap? The sphere rocked, as if jolted by something unseen. He closed his eyes, waiting for the bolt of electricity or hiss of poison gas. When neither materialized, he opened his eyes, and he found himself staring down the long black line of the tunnel. The sphere was moving forward. Looking back, he could clearly see the platform and the open archway that led to the big chamber receding behind him. Reflections proved that the sphere was rotating within the groove like a billiard ball, speeding back down its loading chute, but within the sphere all was stable. The bench did not even vibrate, remaining level and steady as the vehicle continued to accelerate. He tried to recall what little they knew of the terrain they'd crossed. Based on what they had seen, there was a good chance he was now traveling beneath the Cocyton Ocean. Sitting back on the bench, he could only hope that the tunnel would terminate somewhere above the surface. Light appeared up ahead, and the remarkable transport mechanism deposited load gently in a docking chamber that was identical to the one he had just left. Only the fact that the ceiling was slightly lower indicated that he had not traveled in an aimless circle. He had definitely arrived somewhere. Rising from the bench, he began carefully to feel that portion of the sphere's interior that had originally contained the entrance. It irised open and allowed him to disembark. There was an arch off to his left, and he walked toward it. A glance back showed that the sphere remained where he'd left it. As it displayed no inclination to return on its own, he felt safe in assuming it would wait for his return. He found himself in a vaulted room much smaller than the one he'd left behind. It was filled with the usual flowing bulges and distortions in the walls and floor, more inscrutable alien devices. He began to examine more closely the bulges in the walls, and, in particular, various alien devices that rested inanimate in corners or clustered together on the bare floor. Some were encased in flowing transparent cocoons fashioned of material like spun sugar. There was very little duplication, and everything was clearly intended to fulfill a specific purpose. Now, If only, he mused, I could find a label that reads, Interstellar Transport, Key for the Activation of. While nothing so obvious presented itself to his searching eyes, he did come across several entrancing examples of alien design. Most notable was an egg-shaped lump of green crystal. It wasn't very big, about the size of a paperback book. More impressive was the method of display. Instead of lying on a shelf or standing in the grasp of a special mount like so many of the other exhibits, the crystal floated in suspension within a glassy, transparent sheath. Furthermore, it glowed softly from some internal source. It probably would have gone no further than that, a few moments of casual admiration for still another marvel of Cocyton engineering, except that, instead of walking away, he leaned forward, resting his hands on the transparent case while he sought a slightly better look. Images materialized in front of his eyes, sharper and clearer than any holographic production he'd ever experienced. He stepped back sharply, and then lingered to watch. In addition to the visuals, there was an accompanying narration or musical score, he couldn't tell which. It filled his portion of the chamber with a fluid, tenorous sing-song. It was soothing to the ears, and he wondered if it was a language or music. Not that it mattered. If the former, it remained utterly incomprehensible. Of more interest was the succession of images which showed the green crystals employed in various tasks. Apparently they were some sort of general repair and relief device. He never saw any Cocytons themselves, only crystals and their applications. He watched as crystals repaired broken machinery, renewed faded artworks, purified water, fulfilled a dozen other unrelated functions, and, most significantly, were shown reviving or treating the wounds or diseases of several alien life forms. When the demonstration or instruction manual had run its course, the last image faded. He had obviously activated the performance when he leaned against the case. Perhaps repeating the gesture and contact would trigger similar displays in other cases. That could come later. Right now, he was interested only in the incandescent crystal and what he'd learned about it. If it could invigorate crops and revive alien animals, what might it do for an injured friend? Well, more than injured, but still. How could he gain possession? He walked completely around the freestanding case, searching for signs of alarms, booby traps, or hidden connections. Seeing none, finding none, he steeled himself and reached out a second time, intending to test the solidity of the case directly in front of the crystal. His hand passed through what felt like silver gelatin. Fingers contracted around the crystal sheath. It was warm to the touch, but not unpleasantly so. When the case did not react, either by slicing off his arm in mid-reach or through some other equally dramatic rejection, he exhaled with relief and withdrew his prize. It lay in his palm, glowing softly. No alarms echoed through the spire, no lights flashed, no armored doors slammed shut to imprison him within. One moment the crystal had floated before him, beckoning from within its container, and the next it lay inoffensively in his hand. His skin tingled with its contact. He had already seen how effectively it worked on a multitude of forms and devices. Might it also not work on a human? Brink lay as they had left him, lying on his back with his hands placed across his chest. What Lowe was about to attempt was impossible. Of course, so was interstellar travel. Since they'd already put one impossibility to rest, why not another? Instead of questioning the alien technology, he intended to make use of it. Not knowing what else to do, he simply laid the crystal on the scientist's chest, stepped back, and waited. For a long moment, nothing happened. And then the green glow intensified, as if the crystal were reacting to unknown programming, or perhaps to contact with a damaged life form. Had he done the right thing? He reassured himself with the knowledge that he couldn't make Brink any deader than he already was. What happened next made his lower jaw drop, and Boston Lowe was not noted as a jaw-dropper. The crystal disappeared, not by evaporating into empty air, but by sinking into the scientist's chest. Hurrying forward, Lowe knelt at the other man's side and ran his fingers over the place where the crystal had been. It had not turned invisible, it was most definitely gone, into the scientist, melting through his clothing and skin like green ice on a hot plate. A faint greenish aura spread over Brink's torso, lingered a moment, and then was gone. It was like nothing Lowe had seen in the museum. Greater miracles were to follow. Brink coughed. As astonishing as the efficacy of the process was the speed with which it worked. Hardly a few minutes had passed when Brink sat up, rubbed his eyes, and took several energetic swipes at something unseen in front of his face. Turning slowly, he focused on Lowe as he struggled to his knees. "Want a hand?" Lowe watched intently. "Not just yet, thank you." The scientist blinked and shook his head as if trying to remember something important. "What happened, Commander?" His gaze finally settled not on Lowe but on the massive pile of broken rock and other material that towered behind him. "You fell." Lowe was observing him carefully for any signs of lingering trauma, but Brink acted like anyone who'd unexpectedly been roused from a deep sleep. "Yes, I fell." The scientist tilted his head back to stare at the greatly enlarged opening in the roof of the chamber. I remember falling. There was pain." One hand went to the back of his neck. "Then nothing. I must have lost consciousness." "That's not all you lost," Lowe informed him grimly. "You were buried in that when this section of ceiling collapsed. Nothing but one arm was showing. Maggie and I pulled you out." His voice was flat. "You were dead, Luger. Stone cold dead. You've been dead for over an hour." "Really now, Commander?" The scientist pinwheeled his arms. "I assure you, I've never felt better in my life. I found an inter-island transportation system. I traveled to one of the lesser islets and found what looks like a museum of some kind, though it might just as easily be an old warehouse. There's a lot of stuff there. Some of it might prove useful. One thing that caught my attention was a kind of green crystal. When I touched the case that held it, I got a three-dimensional projected treatise on some of its uses. Among them was the utilization of the crystal to cure badly injured animals." He shrugged. "I didn't see any harm in trying it out on you. Pretty hard to make a corpse worse off." His eyes locked on the other man's. "I wouldn't make something like that up," Lowe assured him. "I wouldn't know where to start." "You're absolutely certain I was dead, Commander?" "Indisputably, as dead as that rock." He indicated a basketball-sized boulder that had rolled clear of the rest of the mound. Both men stared at it for a moment. Then their eyes met, and they shared a knowing laugh. "Take nothing for granted," Brink declared. "You say there are many mechanisms in this museum of yours?" "Hundreds, maybe thousands." Brink nodded. "Among many thousands, we may find only one that will reactivate the asteroid ship. We have much work ahead of us." "Don't I know it?" He let his gaze rove around the great chamber. "People who built this place may have died out or moved on, but they left a potent legacy behind them." He turned. "Come on. I'll show you the museum. Mission's free today, also tomorrow and the day after that, and on into the next millennium." Brink was indeed impressed by the variety of devices on display in the museum spire. He went from one to the other, lingering over some, passing quickly by others. Despite their best efforts, they could locate no more of the crystals. In fact, they found nothing of immediate usefulness. None of the alien devices responded to their ministrations, either manual or verbal. They did, however, find several more of the small robotic door openers. These followed them willingly back to the sphere. While they might do nothing for the asteroid ship, there were several large doorways within the central chamber that remained closed. "Watch." Back on the main island, Lowe had coaxed one of the devices over to another arch. He proceeded to crowd the robot. It backed up against the section of the wall next to the arch and stopped. Lowe advanced until he was pressing against it with his legs. It ignored both proximity and pressure with equanimity. "Well?" Brink stood nearby, waiting. Perplexed, Lowe backed up to give the robot some space. "I don't understand. When I crowded the other one, it turned and opened the entrance leading to the transportation chamber. The barrier just melted away." "Do not be discouraged, Commander." "Swell," Lowe groused silently. "I'm being consoled by a dead man." "Okay, I'm all out of bright ideas, Luger. Your turn." The scientist's gaze roved the chamber. There are several much smaller doorways. Perhaps one of these devices will open one of them. To his surprise, one of the newly acquired robots did indeed cause one of the smaller barriers to melt out of the way. The modest storeroom, thus revealed, contained nothing as impressive as the sphere transportation system. Instead, it was filled with piles of reflective straps and plates that were clearly designed to be worn by something non-human. Brink called out from the far end of the room. The scientist's voice was trembling. "Commander Lowe, come quick!" "What is it? What's wrong?" Lowe hurried forward past the mounds of inexplicable gear. Nothing was wrong. Brink was standing before a transparent case not unlike those that dominated the display in the museum spire. It was a little larger than most and hung by invisible means to the back wall of the room. Glowing green crystals floated within, lots of glowing green crystals glistening in their transparent sheaths. "We must get them out." There was an uncharacteristic quaver in his voice. "Why, the door's open now and we know where they are. We can come back for them whenever we need one." "We cannot take that chance." Struck by the sudden vehemence of his own response, Brink took care to moderate the remainder of his words. "Now be reasonable, Commander. We have no way of knowing what devices and mechanisms may return to life in this space at any given time. In our absence, however brief, this room may choose to reseal itself, barring us permanently from its treasures. Additionally, should we encounter future difficulties, it would be useful to have crystals on hand for medicinal purposes." Lowe agreed reluctantly. "All right, take the crystals, but I'm not going to lug them around. You carry most of them." "With delight." As Lowe looked on, the scientist eagerly removed one crystal after another, stuffing them into every available shirt and pants pocket, until he resembled someone who'd swallowed a green searchlight. As a precaution, Lowe pocketed a couple of the crystals himself. Their gentle warmth could be felt through the material of his pants. Brink followed Lowe as the other turned and started for the portal. Lowe turned to Brink sharply enough to startle him. "You know, if these crystals are some kind of all-purpose tool, maybe they can open doors." The scientist grimaced, then considered, and finally found himself nodding in agreement. "Why not? What harm can it do?" The crystals did nothing for the second sealed archway. Lowe touched one to the barrier, ran it along the line between door and floor, used it to grace the glyphs etched in the wall nearby. Beyond leaving him feeling really stupid, the exercise had no effect. "What about your little robots?" Brink made the suggestion when Lowe had finally conceded defeat. "Well, we tried them, remember? They didn't work." "You tried them one at a time. What if you were to utilize several simultaneously?" Lowe was skeptical. "Well, why should that work? The first time it took one robot to open one door. Why should the second door be any different?" "Perhaps because it is different." Brink was persistent. "You're thinking like a human." Lowe eyed the scientist uncertainly. "Well, that's because I happen to be human, Luger, and so are you. Don't start forgetting that." Brink smiled enigmatically. "I am merely trying to emphasize the fact that the Poseidons may have thought dissimilarly. What strikes us as irrational or even capricious may have made perfect sense to a Poseidon." He put a hand on the pilot's arm. "Come, let us try. Are you now in the business of conserving robotic energy?" When the second door melted open, Lowe was too delighted to take umbrage at the scientist's smug smile. As Brink had hypothesized, using different combinations of robots allowed them to open all the remaining archways, save one. No combination of imbrications and robots could force the fifth barrier. Perhaps it was broken, Brink thought. He was gazing through the high portal of the last archway, contemplating the resting, waiting sphere. "We could do worse than explore farther." "I agree." Lowe entered the sphere. Brink followed, green light comically radiating from his overstuffed shirt and pants. The second spire was filled not with mounds of artifacts or cases of mysterious devices, but a grand procession of softly glowing, artfully projected maps, globes, and star fields. The second spire was a shrine to topography, both terrestrial and galactic. Let's see what else we can find. Everything they encountered was interesting, especially the maps showing Cocytus's major continents. One placed them a considerable distance from the nearest shore. None hinted at the presence of a viable population. For the second time that day, the two men spent time calling out to Maggie Robbins, and for the second time, there was no response to their shouts. Something's happened to her. Lowe reached for his pen communicator. Not necessarily. Brink considered the possibilities. Anyone who can survive and thrive in the inhospitable world universe of international media can surely keep her wits about her on a mere alien planet. Lowe had to smile. Well, I'm glad to see your sense of humor survived, too. I'm pleased you find it so. Perhaps the application of the crystal, which, by the way, I should like to call a life crystal, improved upon it. Nothing like dying to enrich one's sense of the comic. I'll take your word for it, Lowe gestured. But I still think it's time we checked in. He pulled the pen communicator from his belt and switched it on. The corresponding LED for Brink's unit glowed brightly, but the third remained blank. She switched her unit off. I can't contact her until she turns it back on, and I can't order her to turn it back on until she turns it back on. So, for right now, it looks like we have no choice but to let her be for a while longer. Let's get going. Having completed 2 successful journeys via the spherical transport system, they felt comparatively confident when they stepped out for the 3rd time. As expected, there were no surprises waiting for them. The transport station was a duplicate of those at the map spire and the museum spire, and the large portal on their left stood open and inviting. The interior of the new spire was considerably different, however. Careful inspection revealed it to be absolutely empty, a vaulted cylinder harboring smooth, bare walls and nothing else. There weren't even any of the distinctive protrusions that commonly bulged from floor and siding. Not an artifact, not a console, not a pile of sealed containers, nothing whatsoever. The spire of the 3rd island was barren. Looks like a dry hole, as they say in Texas. A disappointed Lowe started forward. Might as well make sure. As they entered, their booted feet made soft padding sounds on the polished surface. Lowe didn't know what to expect, only that he'd expected to find something. What was this place? But who can say? Possibly it was never utilized, or perhaps the Poseidons emptied it out before their unknown fate befell them. Could have been intended for use as a storeroom that never was needed. We might as well return to the central island and try the last spire. The room vanished. They were floating in space. Stars, nebulae, and other stellar features surrounded them. Some types were utterly unfamiliar, each representing a new astronomical discovery, hitherto unknown on Earth, but presented within the spire with the assurance of long familiarity. A planetarium. Brink spoke as if in a cathedral. In a sense it was a place to worship astronomy. But what a planetarium! I do not recognize a single constellation. Well, neither do I, Lowe replied. Can you imagine what a teaching tool this would make? The sense of empowerment it would give a child? You'd never get a group of 10-year-olds out of here. Well, I am most reluctant to leave myself, Brink admitted. How do we turn it off, I wonder? By doing the opposite of what's needed to turn it on, I guess. Lowe studied the darkness. There was nothing to indicate a way out, no illuminating arrows, no distant light demarcating the location of the arch. Nothing. I think the door was back this way. He headed off through the stars, Brink following closely. The scientist had a good sense of direction, but he knew it would be no match for the astronauts. They walked for what seemed like a half a mile, but in reality it was much less, when the universe twisted around them. The incredible artificial cosmos vanished. Once again they found themselves in a high, featureless, empty, domed chamber. The exit loomed just ahead, and beyond, the transport sphere waiting silently on its track bed. Incredible. Brink turned a slow circle. There was nothing to indicate that the room held so much as a dim light bulb. The only remaining glow came from the life crystals that filled the scientist's pockets. I wonder what marvels remain to us. The sphere began to slow, eventually rolling to a stop at the end of the planetarium line. Brink and Lowe exited and walked quickly back into the main chamber. Nothing had changed since their previous visit. The heap of collapsed ceilings still dominated the sleek floor. As before, there was no sign of the 3rd member of their party. A check of his own unit showed Lowe that she had yet to reactivate her pen communicator. That's it, rumbled Lowe with finality. She's done enough exploring. I think it's time we all got back together and discussed what we're going to do next. She may have acquired information we can use. You go and discuss it with her, Commander. There's something I must do first. Lo eyed his companion uncertainly. Something you must do? I don't follow, Luger. There's nothing here that must be done. Come help me find Maggie. If she won't turn her communicator back on, we're going to have to track her down without it. Brink took a step backward. Later. A faint glaze had come over his eyes. As I told you, there was something I must attend to first. So saying, he turned to leave. Wait a minute. Lo hurried to block the scientist's path. What's so important that it has to be done now, all of a sudden? What's more important than finding out what's happened to Maggie? The other eyed him in disbelief. Why, the life crystals, of course. They need to be examined closely, studied in depth. They are the key. The key to what? Lo had grown tense. The key to finding food? The key to returning home? If it doesn't include either of those, it's not a key that I'm interested in right now. Why, I'm not sure exactly. Honest bemusement was written large across the scientist's face. I just have this feeling that they're the solution to everything. I thought you never acted on feelings. I had the impression you were a strict empiricist. Which is why it is vital that we study these crystals now, in depth. Brink turned to pleading. Come with me, Commander. Even though you're a generalist, your input is valuable. You have insight, along with other abilities. I'll be glad to help you study the crystals, Lo agreed, after we found Maggie and discuss what we're going to do next. Brink peered down at his pockets, overflowing with softly lambent life crystals. They need to be attended to. Attended to? Stepping out of the scientist's path, Lo followed alongside, trying to find in the other man's expression some clue as to the source of his irrational behavior. Where are you going? Back to the storeroom. Brink's eyes were set resolutely forward. I need to attend to them. Okay, fine. Lode had enough of the scientist and his nascent peculiarities. You go and attend to your precious crystals. Suffocate yourself in them if you want. Stick a couple up your nose. I'm going to find Maggie. With that, he spun on his heel and stalked off in the opposite direction, leaving the scientist to his inexplicable obsession. He sought, but did not find. Could Maggie have discovered how to use the simple inter-island transport system on her own and gone exploring? If she was somewhere on the fourth islet, it would certainly explain why they hadn't encountered her and why she had failed to respond to his repeated shouts and calls. He considered. Brink was preoccupied with his crystals. Why not make a quick visit to the last spire while daylight remained? At first sight, the interior of the fourth tower was no different from the first. It was filled with alien artifacts, many preserved in cases, that reminded him strongly of the museum. But this was clearly no archive. Too many containers were stacked high atop one another, or crowded too close to their neighbors to pass between. None were equipped with incomprehensible labels, or responded with explanatory projections to his questioning touch. There was about the entire vast assemblage an air of long disuse, of a warehouse where last-minute items and forgotten inventory had been haphazardly stowed. Directly beneath the cusp of the spire, and dominating the room, was a massive triangular edifice. There were enough elusive twists to the walls, sufficient bends in the angles, to prove it had been designed by other than human hands. Lo searched his memory for a terrestrial reference, gave up in disgust. It was a pyramid, and yet it wasn't. An obelisk, yet not. Curious to know what precious artifacts it had been built to hold, he methodically walked around the entire edifice. He found a single tunnel leading inward. It was several times his width and about twice his height. Whether that reflected ceremonial proportions or a tight squeeze for the builders, he had no way of knowing. He still had no idea what the founders of this lost civilization had looked like. Taking a deep breath, he entered. The pyramid seemed much larger on the inside than it had appeared to be from without. Some trick of alien optics, he marveled. Given what he had seen already, he was able to accept more distortions of light and space without pausing to wonder how the effect was accomplished. He entered a chamber much larger than the one he had just traversed. Expansive and high-ceilinged, it occupied several stories. Lo had his first glimpse of it as soon as he reached the low railing that marked a sudden drop-off. He was standing on a mezzanine, overlooking a lower floor some 20 feet below. At the same time, it peered up and saw him. A farrago of legs and mouths were linked by a network of exposed ligaments and tendons. There were no bones, no exoskeleton, no visible eyes, ears, or nostrils, only mouths and clawed legs. A guardian didn't need anything else. Contracting its astonishing network of connecting fibers, the creature sprang the full 20 feet from the floor of the lower level to land behind the commander. If he hadn't ducked, it would have taken his head off. As he whirled to confront it, eerie, moaning sounds arose from the multiplicity of mouths. Gathering its claws beneath it and swaying rhythmically back and forth on innumerable legs, it readied itself to pounce again. It was, he saw now, about the size of a full-grown bull moose. With the monstrosity blocking the exit, Lowe was forced to retreat until he was dangerously close to the edge of the drop. Dashing to his right, he felt a cold shiver run through him as the creature immediately skittered sideways to block his path. It was the same when he darted back to his left. He could see no eyes, but it was clearly aware of his presence. Some kind of infrared sensors, perhaps, or something even more remarkable. Sundry mouths opened and closed, in expectation, no doubt, he told himself. He could turn and chance the jump to the lower level, but he had no doubt that the creature would follow. Somehow he had to get around it. Feigning to his right, he dashed left again. The monster didn't go for it, matched him step for step. It's toying with me, he realized suddenly. This wasn't going to work. With each sideways sprint, the thing came a little closer. Soon he'd have no choice but to turn and take his chances by jumping, right into the creature's lair, no doubt. He would only be postponing the inevitable. Fighting back was out of the question. He had no weapons. It was much too big, and there were too many limbs to avoid. He'd have to get away from it somehow. But no matter how he darted and feinted, it continued its inexorable advance, always positioning itself between him and the tunnel. Reaching into a back pocket, he pulled out one of the few objects that remained to him. But why throw a life crystal, he thought? If anything, it would probably make the creature stronger. Could he somehow arrange things so that it would revive him after he was killed? Of course, if the monster tore him apart, it might be difficult even for one of the miraculous crystals to resurrect a mess of scattered fragments, not to mention the impossibility of revival if the creature ate him. Trying to divide his attention between the advancing monstrosity and his remaining choices, he peered back into the depths. That's when he saw a mate to his stalker lying curled up and quiescent on the floor below. It was motionless, desiccated, and dead. Great, he thought, another one. The moaning was very near now. Well, what the hell, he decided. If it didn't work, he wouldn't die any slower. Turning, he threw the life crystal not at the creature stalking him, but at the dead one below. It landed precisely in the middle of the knot of tendons and promptly sank out of sight. Whirling to once more confront the devil before him, he could only listen as the one below revived. Standing and stretching, it angled its perceptions upward. Sensing movement, it tensed, focused, and sprang. Lowe immediately fell to the floor. Claws outstretched, the monster sailed over him to strike the stalker head-on. Outraged moans filled the air as the two tumbled backward in an inextricable tangle of claws and legs. Grasping mouths sought purchase within the tough hide. Claws scraped against unyielding surfaces. Powerful limbs thrashed and thrust. Like a pair of drunken wrestlers, the two guardians twisted and twitched in an orgy of determined fury. Meanwhile, a shaky Lowe climbed slowly to his feet. With no chance of slipping past them, he had no choice but to continue on. How long would they continue to fight, he found himself wondering. Until one killed the other? They seemed evenly matched. Tough, fleshless torsos and limbs could take a lot of punishment. Maybe they would brawl until they exhausted themselves. Well, that was a denouement he could deal with. Turning, he resumed his interrupted advance. Curiosity, as well as necessity, driving him to the tunnel that opened into the chamber on the opposite side of the mezzanine. The passageway opened abruptly into another large chamber. In its center was a magnificently decorated platform, atop which rested a sculpture of exquisite refinement, bathed in a pale light of color not previously encountered. Lowe entered warily, ready to duck quickly back into the tunnel, but there were no guardians here, dead or otherwise. Approaching cautiously, he inspected the sculpted icon. More than anything, it reminded him of pictures he'd seen in books on mythology. A recumbent griffin, he thought, though designed to walk on 2 legs instead of 4. Furthermore, no terrestrial bird had ever possessed a head like that. As for the wings, they were stunted and protruded from the back in sets of 3. He wasn't sure they were wings. They might have been external gills, some kind of vestigial ornamentation, or a sex attractant. Mounting the platform, the reason for the sculpture's extraordinary detail became clear. It wasn't a sculpture, but a corpse. Something about its aspect, something in the face struck him with singular force. He felt he'd finally found a Cocyton. He couldn't be sure, of course. There was one way to find out. Dare he chance it? Digging into a pocket, he removed one of the life crystals. The pale green efflorescence was as strong as ever. "Boston? Boston, is that you?" The voice was distorted by distance and intervening structures, but it was instantly recognizable. Thumbing the tuner of his pen communicator, he tried to eliminate the static. "Maggie? Where are you? Where the hell have you been? What have you been doing?" "Well, where'd you think I've been all this time? I've been studying the Cocyton language." She spoke as casually as if she'd been browsing a Berlitz over coffee and Danish. "Well, how'd you manage that?" "One of the exhibits here," she explained. "It's really fascinating. Makes a CD-ROM player look like a blackboard and chalk. You put this thing against your head. I don't know exactly how it works, but it does." "It's one thing to learn a language," he told her. "Speaking it is something else." A tiny green LED atop the communicator flashed as she responded. "Oh, no problem. I've been talking back to the educator, as I've come to call it. It's funny how once it's put into your head, it just stays there. Wish I could memorize news sources that well. Sometimes I—" She broke off abruptly. "Maggie?" He brought the communicator closer to his lips. "Sometimes you what, Maggie? Come back. You okay?" He didn't have to go hunting for Brink. He knew exactly where to find the scientist. "Ludger?" The other man reclined in the rear of the storeroom where they'd first found the supply of life crystals, basking in their combined warmth. He'd removed them from his pockets and spread them out to form a narrow enclosure. Like a wizard on holiday, he lay in the midst of the pale green framework, hands behind his head, eyes closed. Lowe advanced. "Ludger, Maggie's in trouble. I've just finished speaking with her via the communicators. She was talking to me and her voice went dead like she'd been cut off, but her unit's still operating. Something's happened to her." He nudged a couple crystals with his foot. "I need your help, Ludger. Maggie needs your help." Exerting himself, Brink opened his eyes and sat up. Relaxed and content, he struggled to return from his self-imposed sedation. As he spoke, he rubbed slowly at his eyes like someone awakened from a deep sleep. "You handle it. I'm sure you're much better at this sort of thing than I am." He waved diffidently as he sank back into a reclining position. It was clear the scientist wasn't interested in helping Lowe, Maggie, or even himself. All that mattered to him anymore was remaining close to his beloved crystals. His condition was recognizable enough. He had become addicted. Brink spoke with languorous indifference. "You know, there is a device here that I believe is designed to produce additional crystals." "I'm sorry, Ludger, I don't have time to argue." And so saying, he reached down and grabbed the scientist's shoulder. "You're coming with me, now." "I am not." Brink rose to his feet and shook off Lowe's hand. Though the two men were about the same size, Brink was no fitness fanatic, whereas Lowe, despite his years, still retained the physical stamina that was characteristic of his profession. That, plus his martial arts training, allowed him to overpower the scientist without much effort. Flinging Brink into a corner to keep him out of the way, Lowe began gathering up the glowing life crystals. Dazed, Brink tried to raise himself from where he had been thrown. "No, don't touch them. Give them back." To Lowe's surprise, Brink rushed at him. Lowe sidestepped easily, using his hands and feet, and sent the scientist crashing to the ground. Only the minimal force necessary was employed. His intention was to divert, not injure. Brink wouldn't be much use to Maggie with a couple of broken limbs. Breathing hard, the scientist rolled over. "I know, ich vergessen. I know I haven't been entirely myself here lately. I see now that the life crystals have become something of an obsession with me." For the moment, at least, he looked like the old Ludger Brink, confident, self-assured, good-natured, and just a touch arrogant. "I will help you assist Maggie, but if she is no longer responding, how will we find her?" Lowe drew the communicator from his belt and held it up for Brink to see. These all have built-in search and locate functions. All that matters is that her unit is active, which it is. She may not be talking, but we can still track her. He clutched the compact unit tightly in his left hand. According to this, she's on the museum island. Come on. Brink offered no further objections as he followed Lowe out of the storeroom and back to the main chamber. Together, they hurried toward the transport tunnel that led to the museum aisle. They had to walk, or rather jog, the whole way, praying as they did so that Maggie wouldn't suddenly appear in the tunnel ahead, riding in the glassy transport sphere toward them. While they had no way of ascertaining its chemical composition, both men knew that the rolling globe was not fashioned of thin plastic. Roaring down the tunnel, it would reduce them to pulp. Both men were exhausted by the time they emerged from the subway. Stopping to catch their breath, they took time out to repeatedly bellow the journalist's name. Instead of leading them deeper into the complex, as Lowe had expected, the communicator's locate function angled sharply to the right, pointing toward a series of holes or open doorways. When they reached the wall, Lowe walked back and forth until he was sure which of the openings the communicator was singling out. "I don't like this." Pulling the small flashlight from his service belt, Lowe flicked it to life and entered the poorly lit tunnel. Here the light emanating from the ceilings and walls was feeble, barely strong enough to illuminate the damp floor's conspicuous downward slope. Their compact beams were a welcome supplement. Last time I was in a tunnel, I ended up playing dodgem with a serious nightmare. Brink was inspecting their surroundings. "Maintenance passage, I suspect. How did you escape your nemesis, Commander?" Lowe smiled grimly. Gave it a nightmare of its own. "Do you hear water running?" "Yes, be careful. The floor is growing slippery." He sniffed. "Salt water. This tunnel must run out under the ocean." "Down this way." Continuously monitoring the readout on the communicator, Lowe turned to his left. There was no telling how deeply they had gone, nor how far out under the seabed. Pipes and tubes, conduits and siphons snaked everywhere. Lowe felt as if they were descending into a bottomless bowl of steel spaghetti. No stylish use of metallic glass here, he saw. Only straightforward, prosaic metal and plastics, with hints of some dark ceramic alloy. Brink turned sharply to his right. "I thought I heard something." Lowe nodded. "I heard it too." Turning in the direction of the noise, they resumed their cautious advance. Their boots splashed aside water several inches deep. Long, black, wriggling things squirmed away from their approach, seeking safety in the dark places. "Watch it." Aiming his beam downward to illuminate the source of this concern, Lowe took a long stride forward. "There's some sticky stuff here, mucus or something." Brink used his own light to scrutinize the disgusting mass as he followed Lowe's lead, carefully stepping around the glistening heap. In appearance, it had the look of glue-slathered television cable that had lain too long in the sun. It wasn't cable. Proof came when they turned a corner and came face to face with the long-absent Maggie Robbins. Unable to move, she stood facing them, wrapped up in more of the same stringy gook as neatly as a Christmas turkey. Slime was still congealing around her limbs as they rushed to free her. As they struggled, her eyes kept darting in all directions. "Get away. Get out while you can." She hesitated a moment, blinking hard before continuing. "No, what am I saying? Get me out of this gunk before it comes back." She stared at Brink. Nothing personal, Luger, but aren't you supposed to be dead? I was, and now I am not. It will be explained to you later. He tore at her bindings. Lo had her upper arms and head free, but she still couldn't move. Her legs were pinned to the wall and to each other. Before what comes back? Brink inquired. Do you think I did this to myself? For a supposed scientist, you sure overlook a lot of the obvious. Before the... She stopped in mid-sentence. It did something very unprofessional, though perfectly understandable under the circumstances. Her eyes grew wide, and she screamed. Both men whirled, and there it was. A disjointed, chitinous, crab-like hulk. Ominously, it had scuttled around in the darkness to interpose itself between them and the exit. Despite the danger, Lo was fascinated by the monstrosity. He could clearly see where the silken glue-saturated fibers emerged, not from spinnerets at the base of some bulbous abdomen, but from the specialized organs at the tips of two forward-facing legs. As it studied them, the creature rocked slowly back and forth on multiple jointed limbs. The local underground life here, Lo decided, was all spasms and twitches. But don't just stand there gawking. Robbins could have kicked him if she could have freed a leg. Get me out of this. I am open to suggestions, Maggie. Brink was remarkably calm. Probably too busy trying to assign the creature a classification to be properly frightened, Lo thought. That would come later, when it was sinking its fangs into his chest. He wished fervently for some kind of weapon. All he had on him were the communicator, some generic medicinal tablets, a few food concentrates, and their lights. With nothing else to point, he aimed the bright, narrow beam at the creature. Without knowing where the sight organs were located, or even what range of the spectrum they could detect, he couldn't very well blind it. But when he shifted the circle of illumination to one side, the monster's head swiveled to follow it. Again he flashed the head, and then let the beam drift to the right. Once more, the bony skull turned to follow. He felt an entirely irrational surge of hope. The beam distracts it. Use your flashlight, Luca. The admonition was unnecessary, as Brink had already noted Lo's success. But while it readily followed the dancing lights with whatever organs it used for sight, it would not move from its position. Similarly, it did not advance. They had achieved no better than a standoff. This isn't working, Lo remarked. I commend your powers of observation, Commander. Brink favored his companion with a dry smile. There is no point in continuing this. Eventually our batteries will be drained and the creature will have us. It is distracted by the lights, but not overcome by them. Perhaps a combination of light and motion will prove more effective. So saying, and before Lo could divine his intent, the scientist splashed forward. Waving his arms, he yelled as loudly as he could. The assortment of English, German, and Russian curses, not to mention a few in Latin, made no impression on the monster, but all the noise and moving light did. Crabbing forward, but never falling, the monster pursued the source of sound and light. Brink led it away from the imprisoned journalist. If he fell, Lo knew the creature would be on him in an instant. "Never mind him now," Robin shouted to get Lo's attention. "If he wants to be a hero, let him. Just don't let it go to waste." Brink was of like mind. "This reminds me of my student days, Commander, but I can't keep it up forever. No lolly-choking." "Lolly-gagging," Lo corrected him as he turned back to Robbins. Clipping his light onto his belt, he started tearing at the sticky shackles. Robbins helped as best she could. With Robbins pushing from within, and Lo ripping and tearing from the other side, one strand after another gave way, until he was finally able to fling the stiff length of metal aside and lift her clear. Dried residue covered her from head to foot, but everything worked. His face was very close to hers, but neither of them thought anything of it. Circumstances hardly allowed for a romantic interval. Lo took Maggie's hand, and together they followed the sound of Brink's voice. He was still shouting and cursing to draw the glue spitter's attention. It didn't take long to find him. He'd been backed into an alcove by the spitter, which hovered on the edge of indecision. Lo doubted it would remain that way forever. He scanned their surroundings. What do you suppose that is? What is? Turning, she saw that his beam had settled on a large, puffy pink mound attached to one wall. Thick cable supplied additional bracing, and it was covered with a thin layer of glistening mucus. Egg sac? She racked her brain for memories of anything similar. Food storage? Sleeping nest? Picking up a metal shaft, he directed Maggie to do likewise. Whatever it is, it's important. Look at the care with which it's been constructed, at the thickness of the support strands. If your assessment is correct and we attack it outright, that thing will be on us like a crow on roadkill. You're right. Once again, Lowe anxiously searched their surroundings. This way. He led her to a nearby conduit, through which a powerful stream of water could be heard rushing. Water seeped profusely from a broken seam. Under his direction, they used lengths of metal to dig and pry at the crack, until water began to flow in a steady stream from the enlarged breach. The entire conduit quivered, as if ready to give way at any moment. Bracing their feet against another pipe, they both pushed as hard as they could at the point Lowe had selected. A weak cracking noise sounded above the deep rush of running water, and then the conduit snapped. The pent-up force of the liberated stream knocked them both down. With the power of a high-pressure fire hose, water shot across the gap to smash into the blob of sticky strands. Gluey filaments went flying. Within an arm's reach of Brink, who had retreated as far as possible, the creature whirled. Emitting a high-pitched keening, and exhibiting far more speed and agility than Lowe suspected it possessed, it scrambled madly in the direction of its inundated nest. "Ludger! This way!" Rising, Lowe and Robbins waved wildly in the scientist's direction. With the monster distracted by the roaring water, Brink was able to rejoin them safely. Together, they started out of the abyss and back toward the clear, compelling light of the museum spire. Robbins was limping slightly as they re-entered the main chamber of the central island. "Before something else happens, I just want to say thank you." So she kissed him. It didn't linger or probe, but it was no wispy peck on the cheek either. As Lowe stood momentarily stunned, his powers of review temporarily on hold, she did the same to Brink. "Hey, come on," she chided them when she'd finished. "Maybe saving my life wasn't a big deal to you two, but it had real meaning to me. You ought to be pleased, Ludger. It gave you the opportunity to study another alien life form." Before he could reply, she turned to Lowe. "And as for you, Commander, I know it's just part of your job description, but thanks anyway." "You're welcome. You can thank me again if you like." She wavered, and then broke out into a wide smile. "Why, Commander Lowe, you do have a sense of humor. You just need to take it off your utility belt once in a while." "I know. It's just that I haven't seen much to laugh about lately." She moved closer to him, her voice dropping. "You don't get it, do you? That's when you have to laugh the most." Brink moved to block their path. "And now, if you please, Commanders, the life crystals, I assure you I have not gone off what you call the deep end. I have simply developed an affection for the crystals, not an affectation. I am in complete control of all my faculties, physical as well as mental." "Sure you are." Lowe's tone belied his words. But he'd given his word, and he wasn't in the mood for another fight. Scooping crystals from his pockets, he handed them over to the scientist, who eagerly slipped them back into his own pants and shirt pockets. Brink's eyes gleamed. "Thank you, Commander," he said quietly when Lowe was finished. With that, he turned and strode off across the wide expanse of floor, angling toward the storeroom. Fingers gripped Lowe's arm questioningly. "Okay, now, will you please tell me what's going on here before I jump to all the wrong conclusions?" Lowe ruminated before replying. "I found a peculiar green crystal in the museum spire. And you know that some of the exhibit cases will play back explanatory projections? Well, this one showed the crystal, or one like it, performing all kinds of amazing feats, including reviving the badly injured and the deceased. And Ludger, being the latter, I didn't think it could do him much harm to try the crystal on him. Suffice it to say that it worked. Later, we found a small hoard of them in a side storeroom." He gestured in the direction Brink had taken, "Down that way." "So one of those little green slivers you were handing over brought him back to life?" Lowe nodded. "Ever since we found them, he's developed a passion for the damn things, doesn't feel comfortable unless he's close to them. There's even a machine in the storeroom that he believes is capable of manufacturing more. It's as if he wants to drown himself in the stuff. So what do we do now? Well, when we first got here, Luger and I found another one of those plates, like the kind that were used to activate the asteroid ship. At least it looks similar. I'd still like to find 3 more and try them on the control mount. She blinked as she remembered something. You know, I think I've seen one. Her eyes dropped. In the museum spire. But that thing is there. We'll be careful. Ludger and I wandered around inside for quite a while without any trouble. Besides, I bet the creature is still preoccupied with drying out its nest. Can you remember where you saw the plate? She smiled and nodded. I think so. It wasn't far from the entrance. So much the better. Let's have a look. The plate was indeed located where Maggie had remembered seeing it, not in a case, but on a stand, next to a half-dozen deeply engraved slabs whose function remained an enigma to them. The planetarium yielded a 3rd plate, but no matter how hard they searched, they could not locate a 4th. A resigned Lowe turned to his companion. Yeah, that's it, Maggie. I'm fresh out of ideas. Unless... Don't expect any flashes of brilliance from me, unless what? You really think you can speak Cocyton? Will you give it a try? She didn't hesitate. In the words of the famous missing astronaut, what have we got to lose? Lowe's Cocyton was still in the sarcophagus. It lay on its back atop the impressive platform, arms placed straight at its sides. Hesitant at first to approach too near, Robbins was now examining the length and breadth of the alien body. It's dead. Lowe made a face. Can't fool a reporter of your experience. She ignored the gentle sarcasm. I wonder how many times those life crystals can revive the deceased. We're about to find out. Digging into a pocket, he brought out one of the green shards he had retained from Brink's private hoard. Leaning over an oddly jointed shoulder, he placed the glowing fragment atop the Cocyton's chest. The interior of the chamber suddenly filled with darting, swirling sparks like bits of flame that had become estranged from their candle. Lowe took Robin's arm and drew her back as the crystal melted into the broad chest. It being her first encounter with the remarkable phenomenon, she looked on in mute fascination. The resurrection was not a miracle, only a phenomenon so far beyond the capability of earthly science as to seem like one, an in vivo validation of Clark's law. Certainly it was such to the Cocyton. Rather than revel in its revivification, it remained motionless atop the platform, plainly less interested in its restored life than its tiny audience. And though he had no effective basis for such an interpretation, Lowe thought the alien looked bored. Taking a hesitant step forward, Maggie let her recently acquired knowledge flow from her lips. Though it was the reaction and response they'd hoped for, it was still something of a shock when the Cocyton turned its gaze upon her alone and replied. I can understand it. Muted awe underlined her reaction. Not perfectly, but I can understand. I guess I didn't spend enough time at the inducer. Talk to it, Lowe encouraged her. It was extraordinary to hear the guttural sing-song flow from the mouth of Maggie Robbins. More remarkable still, to see and hear the Cocyton reply. She did her best to translate for her companion. I introduced us. In response, it says that it's called the Creator. That's the name or appellation that its kind bestowed upon it, as near as I can translate anyway. Impressive moniker. Keep going. Where are all the others? What happened to this world? The vestigial wings fluttered slightly, and a great sigh came from deep within the massive chest. Very well. I will tell you. I will do my best to keep my words simple and straightforward, so that you may be sure to understand. And when I have finished, I would ask that you leave me to my chosen destiny and disturb me no more. She nodded understandingly. Lowe was close and anxious. Well, it's going to explain some things, she told him. and in return it wants something from us. He frowned. What could it want from us? Bright blue eyes stared back at him. Death. Long ago, this world of, I will use your far simpler nomenclature for it, Cositus, was a strong and vigorous place. We discovered how to bend the material world to our need. We found a way not to exceed the speed of light, but to bypass it. I cannot think of a simpler way to put it, and I assure you that the technical description would be beyond your comprehension. We sent out many probes to systems that harbored planets, and that we hoped might also prove home to other intelligences. It is a vast universe in which to be alone, and we avidly sought the companionship of other species. Each probe was disguised, camouflaged, as a natural phenomenon so as not to alarm the local inhabitants. She took a moment to translate for Lo. So as not to alarm, huh? Had the opposite effect on us. But if it hadn't, we sure wouldn't have responded as quickly. Go on. The Cositan continued. Only a species sufficiently advanced to leave behind the gravity of its homeworld would have the capability to investigate and trigger the messenger. Once activated, each was designed to return here with its discoverers. This complex of islands was specially designed to serve as a greeting place, where representatives of other species could be met in surroundings that would intrigue, but not overwhelm them. Well, that explains the exhibits like the museum and the planetarium, Lo commented when Robbins had translated for him. She nodded agreement. Not to mention the language instructor. I see the point. If you're welcoming people from a primitive tribe, it's a lot kinder to introduce them first to a simple village instead of taking them off the plane at Kennedy Airport. We had acquired vast knowledge, the Cositan continued, which we were eager to share with others if they could be found. But something happened. Maggie's voice had unconsciously hushed. She was overcome by the Cositan's scale of time and place. Some disaster or cataclysm. It happened after the first probes had been sent out to search for intelligent life on other worlds. The Cositan stared blankly at the ceiling, recalling. While they were in transit, a significant development occurred in our society. Not a natural calamity, as you propose. We had progressed beyond being subject to the vagaries of climate and geology. Furthermore, we had acquired control over our bodies. Lifespans had been extended to the maximum of which our physical forms were capable. Yet for many, even this was not enough. As sometimes happens in science, several profound discoveries in a number of unrelated disciplines took place almost simultaneously. First, the life crystals, as you call them, were synthesized. At the time, they were considered to be the ultimate product of high Cositan technology. You said that your people achieved several scientific breakthroughs at the same time. Lo spoke through Robbins. What were the other ones? The Cositan turned to him. There was a machine. An instrumentality called the Eye. Simple name for something so complex. I did not name it, though I was the one guilty of its evolution. At the time, I was quite convinced that the mechanism ought to be built. My enthusiasm was shared by a small coterie of fellow researchers. Within what you would call the scientific establishment there was much skepticism, but the proposal was met with an open mind. Give us a concept, a design, my group was told, and it will be fabricated. And thus challenged, what else could I do but comply? The necessary schematics were provided. The wing flaps on the Cositan's back moved more rapidly. A sign of excitement, Lo wondered, or agitation, or some alien emotion that would remain forever unknown to them. This eye, well, what did it do that was so important? The Cositan shifted slightly to loosen cramped muscles. It allowed one to enter another plane of existence, to visit a different dimension, to transcend the limitations of time and space, as they are generally known. Passing through the eye stripped an individual of physical substance, leaving only the state of being behind. Yet all of that individual's original self, including the physical, was compacted and retained within the being that remained. much as one might dehydrate a fruit or vegetable. The process was quick, painless, and liberating. It was more than a metamorphosis, it continued. It was the casting off of one existence in exchange for another. In the absence of imperfect physicality, death was reduced to a philosophical concept. More and more of my kind chose to experience the transformation. They saw it as elevating themselves to a higher state of being. As thousands instead of dozens began to pass through the eye, a procedure as simple in appearance as it was intricate in execution, I began to grow more and more concerned. In this I was not alone, but as the originator of the process, I believe I was the only one to envision the ultimate consequences. "You foresaw some danger?" Robbins commented softly. There was nothing I could do. I, who had been so much praised and honored, became the pariah among my kind. I withdrew into myself, into my own thoughts, as tens of thousands and more lined up to step through. As a scientist, I've always been suspicious of easy answers. Solutions should be difficult, time-consuming, and painful. The eye was too facile. In the rush to immortality, I felt we as a species were overlooking something vital. There is existing, and then there is life. I was not certain that discorporeal being was also life. Of course, without making the journey myself, there was no way I could be certain of my fears. No one who had passed through expressed any interest in returning. Satisfaction was absolute, which only made me more uneasy. At that point, I felt only one option was left to me. I needed to do something vivid enough to shock those who remained out of their expectant complacency. I had to propound a warning they could not ignore. They needed to be reminded of the beauty of mortality. So, I took my own life. Robbins gasped at the tall figure. Lowe had to shake her to get a response. "Come on, Maggie, what did it say? Why is it looking like that?" It says that it's a suicide. It was done as a warning to those who hadn't yet made the transportation through the eye. I left behind, continued the Cocyton, not caring whether the two humans had concluded their conversation or not, a request. I demanded that my remaining colleagues not use the life crystals to revive me. In this, at least, they complied with my wishes. But unbeknownst to me, I was given this elaborate burial, and my remains were preserved instead of being allowed to return to the soil from whence they sprang. How absurd! Perhaps they thought that someday I might wish to be revived, so that I could pass through the eye and join my kindred spirits, as it were. They knew of me, but none knew me. I am the only Cocyton left. The Creator's voice was devoid of self-pity and remorse. I am certain that those who placed me here subsequently took their own turns in the line, until voices of my kind were no longer heard on the surface of this world. They abandoned it to lower forms. They used a machine to thwart evolution. My machine. The great head dropped, and this time there was no mistaking the meaning behind the gesture. For a long time, neither human nor Cocyton spoke. "They've all gone?" Robbins inquired when she could speak again. "All. Over. Through. Into. Whichever metaphor you prefer will do. Within that other dimension, all exist still. I have no reason to believe otherwise. Whether they also live, I cannot say. That is a designation I reserve for physical existence. They are here now, even as we speak." I thought I'd felt something. Sparks swirled urgently around her, enigmatic and undefined. Again, Lowe spoke through Robbins. "Does it have anything to do with these flashes of light? When they intensify, I could swear that we're being watched." "You are," the Cocyton told them. "As alien physical intelligences, you constitute a diversion." "How many did you say made the trip through the eye?" The Cocyton made a sweeping gesture. "Assuming every transposition was successful, and while I lived I never saw an unsuccessful one, the number would have been approximately 3 billion. Robbins swallowed as points of light swirled about her. What's it saying? Lo demanded to know. She turned to him. It says that all of the Cocytans who went through the eye are here now in this chamber with us. You, me, it, and 3 billion thought forms. Lo whistled softly. His gaze flicked about the room. Funny, up till now I didn't feel crowded in here. From all that I have been able to glean, the Cocyton told Lo and Robbins, Paradise is a particularly dreary place. When one surrenders physicality, one also gives up all sensations it is heir to, touch, smell, taste, and several other senses I do not think you possess, the ability to perceive electrical fields for one, and to taste of the infrared. In crossing over, all are surrendered, all are lost forever. Lo turned to face the Creator. Now, tell us about this machine. Despite its evident fatigue, the scientist-engineer did its best to comply. If the eye could be reactivated, and if it was properly reprogrammed prior to the last of my colleagues transposing themselves, then I feel certain many, if not all, would return, to gladly engage the normal progression of life and death they unwittingly left behind. As for myself, there is nothing more I can do for them. I did too much while I was alive. My punishment is that I am not to be left in peace, and yet perhaps I may be of assistance to you. Not out of any personal fondness, you understand, but because your departure would assure my continued rest. Help us, Lo urged the alien, and I swear we'll never bother you again. It was an easy promise to make. The enfeebled Creator strained to remember distant schematics from an even more distant time. I recall the activation mechanism that was used on the probes. I believe it involved, and a long string of untranslatable engineering terms followed. A brief physical description, however, left no doubt as to what the Cocyton was referring to. The 4 plates, Robbins told an expectant Lo. It's describing the 4-plate system. We have 3. Tell it we have 3. She did so. Then the matter is simple. I would think there would be others here, in this spire. Before it became my resting place, it was a museum of travel. Search near the entrance. I think you will find what you are looking for. So saying, it raised its feet from the floor, leaned back, and resumed the traditional Cocyton resting position. I tire of this new life as I have tired of all that have gone before. I choose not to think. Leave me now, and if you would respect my intelligence as I have respected yours, do not inflict the pain of consciousness on me again. It is time for me to not be. The slim magisterial head turned slightly toward them. Go now, and I hope you find your way home. My entire species could not. We don't know how to thank you. Robin spoke quickly, conscious of the gravity of the moment. Eyes full of wisdom flickered as the life force began to wane. The voice was an echo of what it had been earlier. You are not home yet. When you reach your destination, thank me then. Eyes closed, the voice silenced, and breathing ceased. Once again, the great Creator was not. Lo was firmly prosaic. It's dead now. Again. That's what it wanted. He turned to look in the direction of the exit. Now maybe we can get what we want. They left the tomb then, a silent, lifeless, but somehow not at all tragic place. It took less than 20 minutes to find the necessary 4th plate. They gathered up the 4 plates and hauled them to the tower mound containing the 4 matching cavities. Whether inserting the plates would activate the asteroid ship or some other system, they had no way of knowing, but there was no place to put the plates inside the asteroid. The original control pylon had metamorphosed and sunk into the floor, taking the original 4 plates with it. One at a time, Lo carefully placed them in the vacant recesses. When the time came to insert the 4th and last, he directed Robbins to move back, and then he inserted the plate and hastened to join her. Side by side, they watched and waited. The plates sat neatly in their receptacles. Light poured through the distant fracture in the ceiling. Somewhere up above, a representative of the local fauna squealed inquisitively. Robbins looked around sharply. Did you feel that? Feel what? Lo didn't have to ask. The floor had begun to tremble. The distinct yet subtle quivering ran up his feet and into his body. It was accompanied by a deep electronic hum, like the moan of some huge hibernating creature stirring from a long sleep. "Over there," Robbins pointed excitedly. Following close on the heels of their elevated expectations, Lowe found the sight decidedly anticlimactic. The fifth and last high, arching doorway had finally opened. They advanced cautiously on the newly revealed portal. "I guess its destination is pretty obvious." Lowe sighed tiredly. "The fifth island, the only one we haven't visited yet." He frowned. "I wonder why such an elaborate setup to operate this doorway. Why hide it like this? There must be something special on the fifth island, something even more remarkable than the creator's sarcophagus. Since we've nothing better to do, we might as well make a visit to the fifth island. Who knows? Maybe it's a giant preserved Cocyton supermarket." Turning, he headed for the beckoning portal. The transport sphere behind the fifth arch commenced its slow, steady acceleration down the black tunnel. When it finally rolled to a halt, they exited and found themselves confronting another spacious, high-ceilinged chamber crammed with unrecognizable instrumentation. The individual devices were larger than anything Lowe had previously encountered, save for the creator's pyramidal sarcophagus. That didn't mean that they would be of any use. From the outside, the machinery appeared simplistic, no doubt in contrast to highly intricate interiors. Dominating everything else and rising toward the peak of the spire was a massive, irregularly shaped console. As big as a house, it took some time to circumnavigate. Lowe hunted for individual controls, while Robbins kept an eye out for circular depressions that might accept metal plates. Neither search was successful. What they did find, sticking out of the far side of the mass, was an assortment of projections tipped in glass, crystal, or some other translucent material. When they touched these, or attempted to manipulate them, or passed their hands over the ends, nothing happened. It was Robbins who picked out the image from the wealth of elaborate glyphs and engravings. Moving to their right, Robbins pointed out a dark hole in the otherwise unbroken flank of the machine. What could go in there? Lowe bent forward to study the opening. "It's much too small to take one of the plates. Maybe some kind of key or card. Now, there's only one thing we found that might qualify as a universal tool." When he looked puzzled, she gestured toward his pocket. He felt the remaining sheathed crystal within. Taking the shard from his pocket, he moved to deposit it in the waiting opening and hesitated. Wait a minute. Why are we bothering with this? Not to mention probably wasting a life crystal. There's no spaceship here, no way home. "We're doing it because we can," she told him, "and because it might bring us some help. The Creator can't do anything else for us. Maybe this machine can." He took a deep breath. "Well, I don't have any better ideas." He turned to her. "Here, this is your idea. You do it." "Okay." She took the life crystal, turning it over several times in her fingers, feeling the warmth of it while admiring the uniquely cool green glow. Then she slid it into the opening and gave it a little push. It disappeared silently within. She put a hand on his shoulder and drew him back. Lights were coming on throughout the length and breadth of the mechanism. Pulsing just beneath the waxy, translucent surface, they formed circles and streaks of intense colors. Some burned steadily, others blinked sequentially, while still others raced back and forth like fiery predators seeking electronic prey. Occasionally, two of the latter would collide in a shower of controlled sparks. "There!" she shouted, pointing. "Something's happening." Before their rapt gaze, a vast section of wall slid slowly aside on hidden bearings. When it finally halted, they could smell the sea and hear the slap of waves against unseen rocks below. More and more machinery continued to come online, throbbing with muted power they had come to associate with Cocyton technology. Inquisitive as ever, Robbins commented, "What's supposed to happen next?" She looked back into the room. Seems like an awful lot of power and paraphernalia just to open a window. Less than a minute later, a high, dominating whine filled the vaulted chamber, and a beam of light 10 feet in diameter erupted from the front of the combined mechanism. The entire room was alive with light, every single piece of machinery, regardless of size, having been brought back to life. The incredible beam leaped through the observatory-like opening in the far wall to soar across the ocean. Floating high above the center of the main island was the resurrected Eye. It hung, suspended, in a crosshatch of tremendous beams, one emanating from each of the 5 surrounding islets. Resembling an immense flat disk, it slowly rotated through a complete arc every minute or so. "Not bad for one small crystal," Robbins murmured. "I wonder what happens next." For once, Lowe had nothing to say. Thoroughly engrossed in the sight, they stood and watched for some 30 minutes before the beam began to fade. No warning flicker preceded the diminution of intensity. The light simply dimmed, and then it vanished altogether. Then all was as it had been before Robbins had slipped the life crystal into the slot. A hidden instrument whirred one last time and died. They stood and listened to the distant harmony of the waves. "It didn't work," Lowe commented finally. "I mean, it worked, it just didn't do anything. It just stopped." Robbins was scrutinizing the far reaches of the chamber, her eyes traveling from one now silent instrument to the next. "We didn't touch anything, and it stopped. Probably designed to shut itself down when nothing happens," he decided. Or what?" she prompted him. "This is a lot for one crystal to operate. Maybe it needs more power to bring it fully online." Her eyes widened as comprehension dawned. Ludger. They found Brink easily enough. When they arrived, they found him in the storeroom, tinkering with a device he had claimed could reproduce them in quantity. "Any luck?" Lowe inquired, as the two of them caught sight of the scientist. Brink glanced up briefly before returning to his work. He didn't seem surprised to see them. "I believe that I am making some progress. The overall layout of the machinery is straightforward, but I do not have the engineering skills, or rather the machinist, to effect the necessary repairs." Gesturing for Robbins to remain behind, Lowe moved closer and tapped the top of Brink's crystal maker. "If we can get this thing up and running, we'll split the production with you." "That seems reasonable," Brink agreed readily. "Let's see what we can do here, then." Feigning eagerness, Lowe knelt and began to fiddle with the mechanism's interior. Some time later, he rose from the device. Lights began to glow within. The small bin attached to the back of the mechanism slowly began to fill with glowing sheathed crystals. When it was full, the device stopped. Nothing Lowe could do, from removing the fresh product to trying different hand passes across the control surface to realigning the internal connections, could induce it to start up again. Meanwhile, Brink had gathered up the new horde. Lowe confronted him. "Looks like that's the best we're going to be able to do, for a while at least. We'll take our share now, Ludger." "Really, Commander," replied the scientist, even as he was edging toward the doorway. "You can't honestly expect me to turn them over to you to squander. If this device has produced its limit, then that means there will be no more." Lowe moved to block the other man's path. "It doesn't matter what we want them for, Ludger. You agreed to the split." With the doorway blocked, Brink reversed direction and began working his way back through the stacked containers and piles of machinery. The storeroom terminated in a drop-off that overlooked another level below. Brink halted, teetering on the edge. There was no ladder, no elevator, no way to make the descent. Clutching the crystals to his chest without pressing them inward, he glared back at his tormentor. Lowe halted. "Come on now, Ludger. Hand them over." "No." Brink's heels hung over emptiness. "We just want our half. You can smother yourself with the rest for all I care." He was very close now, and still the scientist showed no sign of moving. When he had approached to within arm's length, Lowe reached for the glow of an overflowing pocket. As he did so, Brink convulsed and tried to dart past. Lowe grabbed, and the other man swung with surprising force. The commander ducked and pulled, dragging them both to the floor. Life crystals spilled from Brink's pockets, littering the floor with emerald magic. "No!" The scientist scrambled to his feet, staggered, and put his foot down on emptiness. Robin screamed as Brink went over backward, disappearing from view. Several seconds later, they heard the heavy, sickening, inevitable thump. They rushed to the edge. Their companion's crumpled, bent body lay directly below the drop, blood spread out beneath the twisted corpse to form a dark oval frame. In falling, Brink's head had struck the edge of a pyramidal projection. Not only was his neck broken, the skull had been shattered. Bits and pieces of brain and bone lay everywhere. "I didn't mean to do that," Lowe muttered tersely. "I didn't mean for that to happen." Robbins put a hand on his shoulder. "He would have thrown you over if he could." "I know, but that wasn't the real Ludger Brink I was fighting with." He eyed the softly glowing shards warily. "I don't think there's much chance in reviving him with a crystal. The important parts are in too many pieces." His eyes met hers. "It's done, and there's nothing we can do about it. At least now, maybe he's at peace." He indicated the scattered shards. "We might as well pick these up and use them the way we planned." As before, a single life crystal reactivated the entire complex, as well as raising the eye above the mountains of the central island. "Ready?" Lowe held the second crystal above the opening. "Why not?" she smiled. Gazing back into the expressive, open face he had come to know so well, he debated whether or not to kiss her. Not the right moment, he decided, as he fed the next crystal into the waiting slot. Consequences manifested themselves immediately. The beam deepened in color and intensity as a subtle vibration passed through the floor. He passed the remaining crystals to an attentive Robbins. "Keep dropping them in. I need to see what effect this is having on the Nexus." "All right." She resumed fueling the machine as she watched him make his way to the gap in the wall. "Why don't we just dump them all in at once?" He turned to peer back into the chamber. "Maggie, I'm not sure that's such a good..." He never finished the sentence. The concussion was deafening. It blew him off his feet and out through the gap. He landed hard on the rocks outside, bruising his face and arms. Rolling over, he caught his breath before climbing to his feet and stumbling back toward the gap. "Maggie!" There was no reply. Not far from the base of the primary mechanism, which appeared undamaged, he found her, lying face down on the floor. A glance revealed that the feeder slot had sealed itself shut. Sated, he decided, just like a carnivore after a big feed. As his hearing began to return, his ears rang, as if he'd just finished a year as chief apprentice bell ringer to Quasimodo himself. He turned her over. Her eyes were closed. Too stunned to cry, he slipped his arms beneath her and carried her back to the gap in the wall. She'd been so tough, so enduring, that the lightness of her body surprised him. Laying her down gently just inside the opening, he cradled her head in his hand and raised it so that she could see. Her eyes fluttered open. "Look, Maggie, can you see? Can you see what we did? What you did?" Across the intervening ocean, the slowly rotating lens had accelerated tremendously on its luminous axis. So fast was it spinning that it resembled a globe instead of a lens, or an eye. A hand reached up to caress his lips with shaky fingers. "Please, Boston, don't be angry." She smiled, and he could see the effort required. "Don't worry, if you slip away, I'll use one of the life crystals to bring you back." "No." Her strength was fast ebbing, but her voice remained strong. Brink wasn't the same after. Who knows what would have happened to him if he lived? Might have gone a little madder each day. Or maybe one day, without warning, the crystals just stop working and you fall over. No thanks. None of that for me. I'd rather die peacefully than live like that. He found himself shaking his head in disagreement. "You're not going to die." "Right. I'll just lie here and relax. Keep holding me, Boston. It feels right." Silently, they watched the convergent beams, which showed no sign of diminishing, and the spinning lens, which gave no indication of slowing. Her fingers tightened against him. "It hurts, Boston." "I'm sorry." He didn't know what else to say. The beams. Find out what they're for. Find out for me. That's part of the story, you know. You can't leave out critical parts of the story. Bad journalism. I'll try. I'm just a little old jet jockey, but I'll try. You can help me find out, right? Right, Maggie? Her eyes had closed again. That's when he thought of the right words, but then it was too late. It always was. I love you, Maggie. She died there in his arms without saying another word. There was no eloquence to it, no beauty in it. As the poets postulated, she just went away. He laid her down gently on the unyielding floor, her lifeless face illuminated by the final product of a science so advanced it embodied concepts humankind could not yet contemplate even theoretically. While the chamber throbbed with electronic life, the only one that meant anything to him lay lost at his feet. Rising, he turned to squint directly at the beam. Find out what the beams are for, she had implored him. It might only take a nanosecond to find out. Closing his eyes, astonished at how calm he was feeling, he stepped forward off the edge of the machine. He did not die. His leg was not incinerated. Instead, he found himself standing on the light, his boots sinking into it an inch or two. Bouncing tentatively on the balls of his feet, he took an experimental step forward. It was like walking on deep foam rubber. Increasing his pace, he left the spire behind and soon found himself striding along high above the alien ocean. He glanced back. The fifth islet looked small in the distance, its glistening spire a needle looking to pierce some low-lying cloud. Below, he could see the broken terrain of the central island, the quiescent asteroid ship, even the hold through which access could be gained to the vast underground chamber. It all seemed so mundane, so irrelevant. Like his life, he mused. With a sigh, he turned back to face the eye. As nonchalantly as if he were crossing Market Street, he stepped forward into the vaporous maelstrom. The sphere vanished, so did the island, and the sea, and the sky. And so, too, did any sense of up or down, left or right. Looking in the direction he believed to be down, he wasn't really surprised to see that he wasn't there anymore. If he'd been able to access a mirror, he would have discovered that he no longer possessed eyes with which to see. Instead of seeing, he perceived. Looking, or rather perceiving around, he settled on something that had neither mass nor shape, but that was there nonetheless. It was there by virtue of its selfness, adrift in the same waxen pail as himself. Effortlessly, he moved away from the intermittent gray flicker he perceived to be the eye. Looking down, he found that he could perceive the central island, the ocean, and the creatures that dwelt within. He saw everything all the way to the heart of the planet, and looking out all the proximate space as far as the Cocyton sun. He sensed other thoughts moving close and prepared to receive them. When they chose to manifest themselves, they were as clear and sharp in his mind as any speech.
"We have been observing you for some time, by your standards,"
declared one. Without head or ears, he understood it perfectly and turned to confront it. It was a Cocyton, though not one boasting beaked skull and vestigial wings. Rather, it was the essence of a Cocyton, perceived whole and complete.
"Where am I?" "In our place,"
the one he perceived nearest to him replied. There hung about it an aura of great satisfaction.
"In the other dimension. Resign yourself to it. It's remarkable that you have succeeded in coming among us, but now you will never go back. We've been searching for a way back for 1,000 years.
So, this is the fourth dimension. Lowe turned, or perceived that he was turning. Brink should be here, he found himself thinking, not me.
You've come beyond the eye.
Was that a dozen of the thought forms addressing him, he wondered, or a million?
Reactivation was always believed possible, but not likely. The movements of the Creator, when revived, were circumscribed by the exigencies of the tomb. Others have come and gone on the physical plane, and all failed, until now, until you.
The whole world, the entire systems, with its sun, plates, comets, asteroids, and related bodies, all were within reach. He could penetrate and examine anything at will, be it living or dead, From the cells of a strange swimming invertebrate to the molten heart of the planet, from the eye of a flying creature to the center of the yellow-white star, he could cast himself with ease. All this was open to his perceptions, but he could not feel, taste, or smell so much as an errant weed.
Enough,
he thought suddenly.
I have to go back to the physical dimension. Don't you miss it yourselves?
Breathing, declared 1 or a billion.
The sting of dust, molecules against retinas,
The heaviness of air,
moistness,
dryness.
the common sensations. These are what we miss most.
Can't you simply step back through now that it's been reactivated?
Would that we were able.
This time he knew that it was only one addressing him, the first.
Unfortunately, the way has been forever lost. In this dimension of insubstantiality and indirection, there are no landmarks, no signposts. We can perceive the workings of the eye down to the tiniest component. We can observe the beams and note their confluence, but for all that we cannot locate the eye itself. It is the one actuality that is close to us.
Orienting himself, Lowe perceived amid the whiteness and the veiled physicalities a grayish splotch.
But I don't understand. It's right there.
Of course it is,
exclaimed the weary millions.
It has always been right there. It is simply that we cannot locate, cannot perceive.
Well, I can.
Impossible.
10,000 thought forms chorused.
Can it be?
The first moved close to examine the new arrival from inside out.
His neurology differs. He is similar, close, yet different. Not Cocyton. We perceive nothing. Were that it were otherwise.
You'd give this up to come back? Lowe manifested a gesture. All this knowledge? This opportunity? The first confronted him, as much as it was possible to do so, given the limitations of their immediate environment.
Listen well, traveler. Immortality is hell.
Then, follow me. And so saying, he entered the gray splotch. He felt a light buffeting, as if he'd suddenly opened a door to his home on a blustery day. He was standing on the beam that emanated steadily from the fifth islet. The gray globe grew misty behind him. The breeze struck again. Standing at his shoulder, 7 feet tall, was a Cocyton. More massive than the creator, bright of eye, and dynamic of countenance, it inhaled deeply. Much to Lowe's surprise, he found he could understand the words when it addressed him. In the other place, knowledge is absorbed as easily as is food in the physical world. Much was implanted in your thoughts while you were among us. Food, it exclaimed, as though contemplating all the jewels in the universe, to eat again, to consume and process. Eyeing the muscular form, Lowe found himself wondering if the Cocytons were vegetarians. A second alien stepped through the vortex of the eye, followed by a third. Come. The first gently urged Lowe downward, back toward the fifth islet. Now that the way is known, it will not be lost again. We must make room for the others. Looking back as he retraced his steps, Lowe saw Cocyton after Cocyton emerge from the eye. They paused to stare at the sky, the sea, one another. Soon more were stepping out into the 4 other light bridges and making their way down toward other islets. Cries of delight and booming calls of homecoming echoed across the sky. You cannot imagine our debt to you, Boston Lowe. What we owe you can never be repaid. Hey, it's all right. To be perfectly truthful, I didn't think that I was embarking on any kind of good deed. My intentions, my thoughts were elsewhere. The spire that overtopped the fifth islet loomed near. As they entered the spire, Lowe could see numerous Cocytons busying themselves among the instruments and machines. They worked smoothly, efficiently, as if they had left their professions only yesterday. Watching them operate, it was impossible to believe that they had been absent from this place for a millennium. As they made their way through the chamber, which now rang to the cries and calls of the busy Cocytons, Lowe tried to avoid the place where Maggie's body lay. Again the strong hand rested on his shoulder. You grieve for your female companion, do you not? Lowe could only nod. She could not have known how dangerous it was to stand so near the center when final attainment was achieved. Why do you not speak to her now? Because she's dead, Lowe replied bleakly. because she gave her life to... Hey, I don't give my life for anything. Well, maybe the right story. Lo gaped. Maggie was coming toward him. She had been concealed behind a pair of Cocytons. But how? He gawked at his tall alien comrade. And then she was in his arms, and he didn't have to worry about whether it was the right time for kissing. She made sure of that. I thought he didn't want to be brought back. She was laughing at him, dead one minute, giggling uncontrollably the next. Who said the universe has no sense of humor? It seems that they've developed a number of different ways of doing the same thing. It's just a matter of adjusting the crystal or fine-tuning its inner frequency or something. I don't pretend to understand, even in translation, but they promised me there'd be no side effects. The resurrection is permanent for the duration of my normal lifespan, which, I am told, is now greatly enhanced. You can get the same treatment and will live long enough to be feted as famous old geezers. Lo and Maggie embraced for the second time, even more tightly than before. Most touching. The voice was cool, analytical, and familiar. Lo and Maggie turned as one. Ludger? The commander exclaimed. Well, do you know anyone else in this world by that name? The scientist came toward them. As you can see, I seem to have developed an aversion to protracted death. But you look so old. Maggie stared at the otherwise fit and healthy scientist. His hair had thinned and whitened, and his skin looked as if he had just emerged from 12 hours spent in a hot bath. For the second time, he made her a present of his formal bow. Thank you so much for the compliment. I have been on tour, I think you would say it. The realm of the deceased is a fascinating place, though I wouldn't want to live there. I have learned much, in exchange for which a decade or so of life seems little enough to sacrifice. It is not as if I had any choice in the matter. He turned to confront Lo. If I recall correctly, Commander, we had a little disagreement. I didn't push you off the platform, Luger. You fell. I know, and I apologize most profoundly for my actions. I was not myself, but rather under the influence of the life crystals. He gestured at his face, and Lo noted the profusion of wrinkles and lines. My appearance, I am told, is the result of their improper application, a lesson that I will more easily be able to impart to others should the occasion arise. And now, announced the Cocyton, I believe you would like to return to your home. The asteroid ship retains a record of your transference. It is easily reprogrammed. You mean we could have done that all along? No. The Cocyton's tone was somber. You never could have done it. The mechanics are far beyond you, but not beyond your capacity to understand. With a little instruction, you will be surprised at what your kind can accomplish. And we will be glad to share, not because we owe you, which we do, but because it is in our nature. Well, let's get going, Maggie insisted. I have a story to file. You're not afraid? Lo slipped his arm around her waist. It's a long way home, and an old piece of machinery. She took his hand in one of hers, and Brink's in the other. Now, why should I be afraid of a little faster-than-light hop? I've already been dead, and Ludger twice. If one of us ought to be afraid, Boston, it's you. But he wasn't afraid. He wasn't afraid at all. Not with a royal Cocyton retinue to escort them from the chamber. The only thing that Boston Lowe had ever been afraid of was ending up alone. The Dig was written by Alan Dean Foster. This production was read by John Shea. The executive producer was Maya Thomas. The producer and director was Kevin Thompson. The abridgment was made by David Bergantino. The text was edited by John Whitman. The production was recorded, mixed, and mastered at Merlin Studios, New York City.